Welcome back to another episode of the Mana Daily Podcast. Today, I am rejoined with AnCap Tim. A lot of people tend to enjoy our conversation, Tim, so I got to have you back again just as a single guest. And then Manny Feliu. Did I pronounce that last name correctly this time?
Feliu instead of
Hello.
Utah,
I'm
Feliu.
still working on it. I always have a hard time pronouncing his last name. I'm sorry, Manny. We're working on it. But I wanted to get both these gentlemen on here today to talk about economics. And we kind of all come from this from a little bit of a different perspective, a little bit of a different background. Myself, a bit of a mutualist, which is somebody that how do I phrase it? They like filling the void where when we eject the government out of the equation, we can write up personal contracts between individuals. We don't need to get all this legality issues involved. Then we have Tim, who is a little bit more of the anarcho-capitalist, and I'll let him articulate more specifically as to his points. He leans a little bit more into the veins of Murray Rothbard. And then with Manny, I think a lot of times you have articulated you have sympathies towards communism, but I also understand that you say that with a little bit of a grain of salt. So the individual that we cited for a little bit, for people who kind of want to hear what you have to say without jumping the gun and thinking Stalinism, Marxism, and all the extremes, as we know, Michael Parenti, who is an individual, when you look up his lectures, makes very sound cases of the extremes of what we're not told about, of the benefits of corporate imperial capitalism. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Tim open up with the panel, and then we'll have Manny follow up, and then we'll kind of go a little bit through a discussion of some semi pinpoints that I've created, but not really. Tim,
All
you
right.
have the floor.
Okay, man. So yeah, I'm AnCap Tim. I guess that really shows that I'm an AnCap. I'm not. I think I'm a pretty traditional AnCap in the frame of Murray Rothbard, but a lot of AnCaps today, it seems like they're almost like uh, big corporations. We can have nukes as long as it's Mick nukes. And it's very like everything they seem to want to push and tout has to do with this state backing. A corporation, I don't think would exist in true AnCapistan. Now, I think people can get together and form um, uh, business partnerships, but I think that would probably be more along the lines of mutualism, as you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not an AnCap that's going to defend corporations. I'm not even an AnCap that's necessarily going to defend capitalism as we know it, because Marx and a lot of his and people that came before him that he learned from, socialists, they really coined the phrase capitalism, and so and they had some real problems with what they saw in what they termed capitalism, and really what they were describing, I think, is better called cronyism. It's where they were sick of the railroad and these industrialists that kept getting these government contracts, and they were just able to, with the force of the government, exploit people. And so they were right on their critiques of what they coined capitalism, but wrong on their solutions to capitalism. Instead of saying the state is the problem, in some ways, Marx did say that the state was the problem, but the solution to his problem being the state and cronyism, capitalism, as he coined it, was let's double down on the state. We need to take control of the state so that we can consolidate power around the party, whatever the people. It's the whole line. The statist line is always the modern statist line is always power to the people. You know what I mean? And so that's, I think, my biggest critique of Marx is that instead of rejecting the state, he embraced the state. And so I am an anarchist and an ANCAP from the vein of Murray Rothbard. Rothbard took that term capitalism, which was written by a bunch of socialists, and said, okay, if your problem is the state, let's take the state out of capitalism and get anarcho-capitalism. And let's follow these theories out, and let's see if this would be a better solution. And that's where I stand. And I think it has to do with cooperation, organic order, spontaneous order, um, and voluntarism. That voluntary exchange will always be morally superior to putting guns to people's heads to saying, you have to do this. You have to go along with this. The party says so, whatever, however you want to frame it. Good ideas will always be better if they do not require force. And I don't think good ideas require force at all. I think voluntary exchange and spontaneous order is the best thing. I think the best example of that is the black market, not child trafficking. I mean, as we know, as we've been finding out the last few months, or how of what we've all known for 10 years, the state is pretty good at trafficking human beings. I'm not talking about that type of black market. I'm talking about mutualism. I'm talking about agorism. I'm talking about farmers trading directly with other people. That is, I think, is when we see that true laissez-faire anarcho-capitalism. That's what I believe in.
Perfect. Very well summed up. All right, Manny, you have the floor.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, my name is Manny Feliu. I'm coming in from rural Colorado. I run a nonprofit out here, and I also freelance on the side doing media agency stuff and other things alike. My problem isn't necessarily the state. I do think state oversight is a vital component to ensuring um, good markets. So I would classify myself as something more of like a market socialist. Um, Terms I think might get in the way of some understanding sometimes, so I'm going to say that a bit loosely. Um, I just think if you want systems to self-regulate, we have to pave the roads, paint the lines, put in the guardrails. Um, if there is no way for the system to understand where regulation is meant to happen, then it can't self-regulate. And if you want things to trickle down, sometimes you have to force the rain. So this is sort of my thoughts on sort of market socialism, metaphorically speaking, obviously. I just don't believe that we can have a real conversation about economics without having a conversation about governing structure. They go hand in hand, right? So, which is why I say something like a market socialist, because I believe people should have a democratic say in the way production happens and the way resources are doled out. Um, because without that, then what you do have is state control, right? You don't actually have any form of socialism. You have state control of resources and production. And it's really hard to get something to regulate itself when it is the only thing without accountability. Um, so that's where I'm coming in today.
Okay, okay. And where I'm coming from, it's a little bit between several individuals. The most common is Joseph Proudhon, who kind of coined the concept of mutualism. It's basically where the status regulation fails, the mutualism substitutes that void. Mutualism, as James Harrington, and he was a guy from the UK back in the day in the 1600s, a lot of the founding fathers liked what he had to say in premise. But he said, according to the Harrington theory of economic determinism, the realization of popular sovereignty is a simple matter. Since political power proceeds from land ownership, a simple diffusion of land ownership is that all that would be needed is to ensure a satisfactory distribution of power is that everybody owns and everybody rules. Now, I was messaging a little bit with Tim, and he was asking how does that necessarily work with the concept of property. And I found Leviticus 25:23, if we're going from this from a little bit of a biblical perspective, that God owns all the land. So you can't exactly distribute that to every single person. However, I do think there's a little bit of a benefit of the negotiation is like if you're a lumber guy, I guess you would be the guy that'd be in charge of the lumber area. If you're this, so on and so forth. And then basically, mutual thinking believed that while capitalism had its era, it's now time to reform towards a mutualist voluntary cooperation and not destructive competition, to become partners and not wage slaves, regulated by the community and not the state. And then it goes a little bit into and I'm not going to talk about that all at this time, but my wampum admiration, which is what a lot of the Native Americans back in the day They would forge a wampum bracelet as a bit of a token of a contract being made between two individuals, and this was basically an honorary system of essentially saying, we are willing to do trade with you. We are willing to have a cooperation, voluntary interaction with you. And if we say that our terms are not being met with said cooperation, we'll just destroy the bracelets. And these things were very meticulously made out of seashells and whatnot. I kind of lean a little bit towards that because Proudhon was basically saying, if you want to basically have trade within the community, why not do something to the equivalent of credits and or contracts of IOUs? And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be paid off, because I think that's also where the biblical concept of jubilee comes into play, and the concept of ecology mutualism, where, for instance, a rhinoceros out in the wild of Africa, he benefits off of the little birds that are picking off all the ticks from his back. Now, is he going to shake off the bird? No, because I benefit from you being part of this system, right? And I think there's a little bit of that to be considered with the monetary aspects of this. Um, Without any further ado, I'm going to give Tim a little bit of a moment to counterpoint what either Manny said and or what I said. And from there, we're going to start breaking down the nits and the what am I looking for here? The nits and gritty of the visions of these three individuals. I kind of have a little bit of a list here. Tim.
Yeah, I think the main difference between what we've all said, or between me and you and um,
Manny.
Manny, sorry. I couldn't read the text. I got it small on my screen. I'm sorry. Manny, is competition. Competition to me is what will regulate. It will regulate way better than a bunch of agents of the state with guns. It will also establish what is best. Free market and free competition allows the cream to rise to the top. I mean, if it's truly freedom and I don't have the force of the state to keep competition out through regulation or through taxation or through licensing, through fees, if truly is a level playing field, that competition, that if I'm doing something shady, if I'm creating something that's killing my customers, competition is going to put me out of business. And possibly just bad business practices will put me out of business. I don't even need competition if I'm that shitty of a businessman that I'm doing something that's harming my customers. There's no business owner that wants to harm the people that are enabling him to make a living. And to me, that concept of, yeah, that's just this greedy businessman that just wants to just take and take and take. Well, you can't take and take and take in a voluntary society. You have to give something in order for someone to say, yeah, I want that. I'm going to give you this in exchange. So it's only through state force are you able to truly exploit people. If I raise sheep, if I'm just raising meat sheep and butchering them and selling their meat, how am I exploiting anybody? I have no ability to. Now, if I'm selling rotten meat, if I'm selling tainted meat, that is eventually going to come out. And even in the system where we have regulation, we have the FDA, tainted meat, rotten meat still happens. It still happens. So does the regulation stop it? Does the regulation stop bad business practices? No, it still happens. I would say it protects those who have enough money to pad the politicians' pockets to get away from the regulation. And the only ones that are truly left in a voluntary society are the ones that don't have the money to pay for the greasing of the politicians and the regulations. And so again, back to my agorism, my free market, my black market. I don't go through the FDA. I don't go through any type of regulation. But every year I grow customers. Why? Because I provide a good product that people want to voluntarily buy. What regulates me? Not the FDA, not any government agency. What regulates me? The fact that I want to keep customers and the fact that I want to keep them coming back. And so regulation doesn't do it. Competition is what regulates a free voluntary market. And I think that's our biggest maybe disagreement.
No, I think that's fair. I like that. That's good. Manny, anything you'd like to say before we go on to another point?
Just processing this for a moment.
For a second, I thought you froze.
Nope, nope, just writing down some stuff.
Fair.
Um, yeah, I think you're right, Tim, in that that's probably where the main point of disagreement or different views lie. I think in the end, we're all looking for probably similar outcomes of fair practice for the most people, right? But I would lean to say that perhaps the validity in a less regulated market lies in smaller markets. Um, so if you have a localized economy and this is a, we'll say mostly word of mouth economy, everyone knows everyone who knows everyone. There's only four guys that are selling lamb in this economy, and you're going to go to the guy that sells the most reliable and best quality lamb within your local marketplace. I think once we start to extrapolate that into larger and larger systems, um, more socialized regulation is what I would advocate for. Uh, some kind of democratic form of regulation, I think, then starts to be more necessary um, because I don't particularly agree with the stance that shitty business practice doesn't necessarily equate to bad business.
Right.
Um, I can be a really good businessman and sell you on something that goes against your interests. And I can also put out a lot of other competitors simply because I am better at business than they are, not necessarily because my product or my practices are better.
Yeah, but how long do you stay in business doing that without regulation of the state?
How long do I stay
Like
in
if you're
business?
let's say a good example, I think is a good
Yeah,
example of what you just said, like a used car salesman. If he's just selling lemons, eventually it catches up to him, and he gets the reputation of don't buy a car from that dude.
sure. Again, I think in localized markets, it's a lot easier to see that. I think in larger markets, it's really difficult when it's spread across, let's say, millions of people, right? So the burden of someone's economic choices when they're spread across, or the burden of a state's choice, a socialized choice economically, when it's spread across millions of people, it's harder to identify where the bad practice actually is because you're so far removed from it, right? So if we're talking about really large systems like what bid what contractor do we go for to build the next highway system across the US, right? Like that is such a large scale project that the average individual is so far removed from economically that it's hard to identify where the bad practice is for the average person. And so you can sort of pawn larger systems more easily because the average person isn't quite connected to what it is they're actually taking a part in. Um, so again, I can beat out better competitors in these larger systems simply by being a better spokesperson or a better businessman or um, just being able to sell myself better than the competitor would. And it would seem to the average person that maybe like these two competitors aren't that different, but perhaps some of my practices will have drastically different impacts long term. But by then we're another generation in and further removed from the issue. And so I'm able to resell the same solution again.
Yeah, but I think the difference is in a true voluntary society, I don't think you have these mega corporations. I don't think you have Amazon. I don't think you have Walmart. I don't think they exist without the infrastructure of the state. And I think the state is what makes them big. It's what makes them national. It's what makes them global to an extent. And I think it's very hard in a true voluntary society for a state or for a corporation to grow nationally. I don't think it's too much competition, and you're not able um, to use political power to keep the little guy out. Like all these multinational and or just um, national companies, just focus on the United States of America. My wife's in the medical field, and you see it all the time in the medical field. It's so regulated, and it enables the big guys to keep out the competition. There's this thing, this regulation in the state of Virginia. I think it's called uh, point of need or something like that. Basically, my wife's in cardiology, and it's a cardiology practice, a small one, and they're a competition to the big hospitals, and they don't like it, and so they've got the law set up in the state of Virginia that you have to get permission from them, from the hospitals, and you have to basically say that there's a need for this heart monitoring machine, whatever they got. But we can't get it unless these hospitals check off on it. I mean, is there any a better example of cronyism and the fact that when you open these things up to a larger scale, that how that the regulation is just used by the person with the most money. So while you're trying to regulate the big corporations, to me, that system only benefits the big corporations.
If I may, I'm just going to interject for a second while
Yeah.
Manny gathers his thoughts, because I think this is something where we would align when we go back to like 2020. A lot of us were all saying, well, look what they're doing to the small businesses. Amazon's now starting to skyrocket and take over. We don't have that option of saying, you know what, I want to go, instead of getting meat from Walmart, I want to go get natural and organic from Tim. We started seeing that, and a lot of people started having that empathy. So while I hear what both gentlemen are saying, I think that's kind of what we were talking about. Maybe the compromise here would be is across state lines, we have a necessity for highways and roads and all these sort of things, but on a communal scale, get away. We don't need a corporation or the aspect of somebody, just because you have more money, that you start buying out the notoriety of a well-known brand. I was reading a guy the other day, and it says that's kind of what it was. Honor and honesty. They have a root etymology, and these brand names were something that people would put money into because people were good by their name, right? And then they bought that out, and then we have fluoride in toothpaste. I mean, so on and so forth. We're talking about big corporations because it started out as a good thing, but when it became corporatized, right, every time it goes like into a franchise mode, it ruins the value of the mom and pops. You know what? I appreciate the little stuff that you contribute to the community. And I think while, yes, those corporations do have their necessities, I think that's kind of where it comes back to square one. Two books I would recommend for people who are kind of wanting to understand what Tim's talking about. I've been reading about it. I didn't really think from this perspective before, but man, does it nail it on the head. An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States by Charles A. Byrd, and Our Enemy, the State by Albert J. Nock. Wonderful reads that is talking about how we had the Articles of the Confederation, and once they were done with that, they basically wrote the Constitution, and it was for the economic benefits and landmass grants for everybody that was wealthy, that were the politicians, the people that were in charge. And while that is how we started as America, unfortunately, merchant class, we now have this technocracy class that is
Mm-hmm.
coming in to fill that void. And I think this is where we're arguing, saying, well, if there's always creating now a class war, why am I always going to trust the people that are basically creating political prostitutes to pass legislation that's not in favor of the community and is more in favor of the corporations? So I'll say that. I'll let you have a point, and then we'll go on to the next point.
Well, I mean, I think that this comes back to the notion I made earlier that you can't have a real conversation about economics without talking about governing structure. Uh, so much of what has been said already is based off the governing structure we currently sit in right now, right? So the idea that politicians can be bought out, yeah, is that only exists under certain government structures, right? It's not possible under more socialistic or communistic government structures. If the people have the means of production and they are the ones that decide what gets produced, how many resources get used to produce that, where resources come and go, right? Then there isn't a control of those resources. There isn't a control of those means of productions that a governing structure could take advantage of. and then squash smaller competing forces with it, using their regulatory systems to do so. That sort of reality is certainly something that we see right now in the systems that we have, that we live under right now. And so it's a real reality that has to be faced and should be talked about. Um, in thinking about what would make current systems better, and hopefully what the evolution of systems could be, right? I think there's a lot to be said about, um, what are we currently living under right now, and how can we very easily adapt that to be living in a world that is fairer, right? That does allow for less government overreach into smaller organizations, right? Where perhaps regulatory systems are aimed at larger organizations, right?
Mhm.
I don't really need the FDA focused on my local mom and pop. You're absolutely right, Tim. I I know that, for example, Ella, who lives just 30 minutes south of me, who has her sheep farm. That's why I brought up the lambs, because I was thinking about her. Um, like, I know I can trust her meat. People buy it every day,
Right.
right? No one's getting sick off of her meat, right? I don't need the FDA sticking their nose into Ella's operation, right? There's just no real reason for that. Um, Larger, multi-state, multinational corporations that are shipping meat, across the country or worldwide, I think, yeah, absolutely, there should be some regulatory oversight there. Um, and I think that should come from the people. I mean, the idea is that in a democratic society of the people by the people, we are the ones that are instituting the guardrails, right? We're the ones painting the lines on the roads that we built. Um, and so the ideas are simpler in practice today, I will say, than they were in the past. They are more possible to be more democratic today than they were in the past. So we have a representative system, and we have a representative system for a reason, right? It's really hard to capture the votes of every single person on every single topic at any given time, right? Particularly from our inception up until the internet, right? Incredibly difficult to do so. And so it made a lot of sense to have, a voice of a region go speak for that region on their behalf. We have the capability now to adapt the representative democratic system that we live under in the US, right, to be more democratic and less representative, right? That we can have greater voices of our own representation within these systems, right? We can evolve this system to say, hey, we're now going to put on online platforms, and again, in heavily regulated ways, right? Ways for individuals to vote on these large scale decisions, and removing the need for some of these, levels of representation at higher levels that can be more
Yeah,
easily manipulated.
I agree with that. And I think let's go a step further. Let's,
Sure.
if you have a program, a government program that you want to bring into existence and you want funding for, how about we set up GoFundMe's for the program? And if people fund it, it gets made. If they don't fund it, it doesn't get made. To me, that is a much better way of governing than democracy. Democracy is basically uh, two wolves and a lamb deciding what they want to eat for lunch. So the majority is always going to push down the minority. Um, but
Oh, I don't want to give the impression that I believe in direct democracy as the best form of democracy.
yeah,
Just want to
well,
state that.
Well,
well
that's where I would
what's the
interject
alternative? Yeah,
because I think that's kind of stupid. Like, for instance, I'm not sure what it is about for Colorado, but for like the state of Connecticut, we've had Murphy and Blumenthal in office for like what, 15, 20 years apiece. The red guy will never get represented in the state. A libertarian will never get represented in the state. So you're telling me for over 2 decades, I'll never have my voice represented. And this is where, again, I would agree. It's more of the powwows. I come to represent myself unless I'm representing somebody that's, ill and they cannot, medically be here themselves to represent themselves and articulate their points for consideration. And I think that when you're only sending one delegate from one political party, you are now not hearing half of the other individuals of your state and or the place that you are representing. And I think that's a great disservice. Moving on, if we could, because it's still in the same vein. I'm just going to read these points as we keep going and kind of guide the conversation. So with Rothbard, Parenti, and Proudhon, they all oppose centralized power, which I think we just all came to the agreement. As we said before, we all came to the agreement, but they disagree on what replaces it. Now, one, the economic vision, one sentence for each, the core thinking of each ideology. Rothbard, absolute private property plus free market replaces the state. Parenti, democratic control of major industry to prevent exploitation. Proudhon, possession-based markets plus worker cooperation replaces capitalism and the state. Your thoughts, gentlemen? I'll let
Take it
Tim
away,
go
Tim.
Oh yeah.
because I saw you gave that face.
Well, I think Rothbard is the only one that correctly understands that the other options require state guns to people's heads. Um, voluntary exchange is the only one that doesn't have uh, government force behind it. And to me, that's always going to be the moral ground. You can say, well, it's not practical. Who would build the roads and all these arguments, but you still can't get around the moral argument. Because if you think that roads have to be built by putting guns to people's heads, you say, well, you're not putting guns to people's heads. Well, you're taxing them and they can't voluntarily say whether they want to pay the tax, not like a GoFundMe. They have to fund the road. Uh, and so it is like putting a gun to their head because if they don't pay it, they're going to be fined. And if they don't pay the fine, then agents are going to come to their house eventually and try to arrest them. If they resist, they will kill them. So it is under threat of gun. Every tax is under threat, and really every law should be followed up with. And I'm not gonna curse, but I like to when I say this. Every law should be followed up with, or I'll effing kill you, because that's really what it comes down to. Every law is, no matter if it's a tail light, if you don't comply, a broken tail light, they will kill you if you don't comply. The agents of the state, and so that to me is the crux of the argument. You cannot get away from the morality of voluntary exchange, free people deciding to exchange and live in a commune if they want, or whatever. That voluntary um, decisions by people to then, on the other hand, government force, guns to people's heads, stealing funds from them to fund whatever program that you want to fund, the roads, whatever. You can't get away from that argument, that moral argument. And if you can, I'm welcome to hear it. But I'm pretty sure it will consist of, well, sometimes you just got to put the guns to the heads.
Manny?
Yeah, I agree. You can't get away from the moral argument.
No.
My conclusion leads me to believe that we need regulatory systems, including agents of the state or agents that act on behalf of the state. And by the state, I mean the concluded expectations of a joint and unified society, which again, we can become more integrated into the state, right? I think part of the problem of why we see so much abuse of state power is because we aren't as integrated into the state as we could be. Um, so I do
No.
believe that morality would say, um, if you have a group of people that have decided to move forward in a certain way, and you have um, some individuals that are trying to oppose the progression of this joint collective decision, um, those those objectives need to be done in a way that they don't then go against the objectives of the collective. Um, that they can somehow happen simultaneously or in a different way. Because I think the best we can muster up in this world is some kind of Mill's utilitarianism, the best amount of good for the best amount of people, the most amount of times. I don't think aiming to perfectionism or idealism is going to get us any real world practical results in terms of can we measure the improvement of people's lives as a collective over time. Um, and what we see in other areas of the world that are still heavily unregulated, that don't have effective and efficient state power and oversight in communities, right, in forms of police forces or firehouses or things of that nature, right, is that sure, while some communities end up practicing really good practices, some other communities end up getting really abused by the people within them because the collective of that community fears them or doesn't want to go up against them. And so and they have no collective force to then call in to say, hey, this person is really harming our community. Um, I just think morality would say we need to give those communities some capacity to call in collective force, as opposed to allowing some communities to go unchecked and unregulated while they abuse everyone within their
Well, wouldn't the idea of a militia or a organic force of people voluntarily saying, all right, we're going to go, we're going to be a part of this, we're going to take down this mafia, whatever you want to call it, that's plagued our city. Wouldn't that be far better than putting guns to people's heads, stealing from them funds through taxation, and then putting together a police force? Wouldn't a
so
voluntarily
so
funded thing be better?
yeah, so I think what you're proposing is exactly what we had before, right? We had groups of individuals that took it upon themselves to become enforcers of their own community. What then we saw happen very shortly thereafter is once they were effective enforcers of their community, they decided that they could grow their power by starting to be enforcers of other communities.
But
And so
how did
then
they
they
grow their
became the
power?
unregulated, huh?
How did they grow their power though? This is very paramount.
Through
By
pointing
taxation,
guns at people's heads,
by stealing
through
money from other
like
people. Yeah,
100%, right?
right.
And
So
so the
I'm saying that there
idea,
needs to be
All right, all
some
right.
enlightenment. There needs to be some enlightenment from people in the community. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying everybody is ready for voluntary exchange necessarily, but I think a lot of people are, because most of our lives are engaged. We engage in voluntary exchange. I don't go. I don't think I've
yeah,
ever went out and put a gun to somebody's head and be like, "Give me your money." I've never done that. And I've never had anybody personally do that to me my whole life. I'm 40 years old. I've never been robbed at gunpoint, but I pay taxes till April every year. I'm taxed on my property every year. I pay tax on my food every time I eat. Come on now. Can I get a witness?
I
Hey,
actually did have somebody say that to me from their truck one time. Give me your money. I turned around and said, "Give me your love," and they sped off so fast. It was funny. Anyways, I think it's funny because I read that just this morning, Manny. We were having that discussion when you were staying at that place near Brian's on Enfield. We were talking about how even Jefferson himself had said, God forbid we go 20 years without a revolution. And he was inferring in a letter to a friend in regards to the Shays Rebellion. He's like, I think that was totally justified in what they were doing because they were not being compensated by what we said we were going to do. So because we failed in our part of the agreement here, they had full right to come up with arms and force, which I think this goes back to whether it's a militia, it's a warrior mentality. You violated a woman from our tribe. We're going the warpath. We're going to go, right? There was a little bit more of that mentality of you're not going to get away with this just because you think you're bigger or better than us. There was a little bit like, if you're going to do this, you might start a range war, aka a feud, something of this nature. Not that I think that's what we should do. I think, because I noticed that Tim, he gave a little bit of a flicker of an eyebrow there when you're talking about the concept of going more towards the state, because now we start getting towards a category of being compulsive with our compliance as opposed to being voluntary with our contribution. And I think that's kind of where we're gauging. We're flickering with each other, but we're like talking right past each other. I think we all do kind of agree. Um, these things can be done. The problem is I personally am with Proudhone still, and this does actually not agree. I think it totally aligns with what you're saying, actually, Tim. Possession-based markets plus worker cooperation that replaces capitalism and the state. However, I see where you're talking with the concept of, yeah, there's free trade. If you want to go to that mom and pops, you want to go to this mom and pops. That is your choice, an option. Yes, I think to that extent, it's great, but I don't think putting the state to be in charge of everybody or saying we all have to do that, because at a certain point you do it by the state, for the state, and of the state, or of the party, or for the party, and as opposed to, you know what, we're doing this for the community. right? And you end up becoming state robots as opposed to autonomous individuals with your own
So
sovereignty.
can I ask how
Absolutely.
we're envisioning the state then, right? Because this might be just a point of semantic contention between
Right.
us.
Right.
I see the state as a collective of people. Right? That is for me the definition of a state. It is a collective of people who have unified together and who have decided to collectively work towards mutual ends.
Okay.
Um, how they decide to do that, what governing structure they use, what economic structure they use, what systems they put in, whether it's with system or without system, they have decided collectively we're working together towards mutual end. That's a state. It's a collective of people working towards mutual end. Now,
Yeah.
here we live in the United States, right? So we have a state system. It has a regulatory system. It has a governing body. It has an economic structure that long ago was adopted that we have inherited now as citizens, right? We have the ability to influence that state. We have the ability to evolve that state, right? We have the ability to leave the state, right? But as of right now, we are members of this collective, right? And so the idea isn't that the state as it is should be protected at all costs, right? That I would never advocate for that. In fact,
Okay.
there are many states across the world that should be abolished. I mean, they're just terrible, right? The groups of people working in very bad faith doing collectively very bad things. Like that's a terrible state of people to be a part of,
Right.
right? And,
Right.
and to just have around you. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that the states I'm a part of, right? Because we have multi levels here in the United States. So on my city level, on my county level, on my state level, on my federal level, that every portion of that state system is working against my interests. I wouldn't go as far as to say that. And in fact, I would advocate that the parts of which that are, because I acknowledge that there are, can be influenced, and it is our duty to influence them.
Mm.
All right.
So I went on a bit of a spiel, but there was an
No,
underlying
no.
question about how we're viewing a
I
state.
love that.
No, that's
Your
good.
response is great.
I'll go after you, Tim.
All right. Can I say what a state is?
Yeah.
A state is a monopoly on force. Monopoly on force. And the whole idea of a collective being more important than an individual, I reject wholeheartedly. The individual is the greatest minority on earth. And I'm for protecting minority rights. I'm protecting individual rights. And you mentioned earlier, and it's a very good point. You mentioned earlier how this idea of voluntary exchange and the way I do my sheep business can be on a small scale, but it just can't quantify. My response to that would be if the state getting involved on a small scale would throw that off, then why the hell would you want it on a large scale? If the state can't manage something locally, then how are they going to be able to manage it on a national level? If there's anything that bureaucrats prove to us is that they are idiots, total idiots, and only care about the money that's going in their pocket to grease whatever gear that needs to be greased so that the big corporation or whatever their donor can get what they want done. So if it can't work, if it's not a good idea on a small scale, why the hell would we want to put it on a large scale? And my other thing is, why do we need all these? Why do we need a national collective? Why can't we exist on small scales? That was the original intent of the Articles of Confederation. It was supposed to be 13 little states, and they were going to basically govern themselves. And I will concede from a government standpoint, and I believe that governments, all governments, whether local, state, or federal, they're all monopolies on force. But I will concede that on a local level, you at least have a chance at kind of reining in that monopoly on force. You can forget about it on a national level. I mean, what is our vote worth? Like 0.00001 on a national election? And you're talking about, you mentioned earlier about integrating people. We just need people to integrate more in this collective system. Well, the last 4 to 8 years, we have got that a marginalized community known as MAGA to be integrated into this system. And what has that gotten us? That's gotten us ICE. It's gotten us trying to now dominate the whole hemisphere, the whole Americas.
Mm.
So, I mean, the whole idea of the majority ruling and getting people that are feel neglected by the collective to we just need to get them in the process. Whoo, that sure ain't worked out for us under MAGA. It's been a disaster.
Mm. I'm going to say something. I'm going to let Manny a chance to respond, then we'll move on to the next point. Um, we used to have a thing within the United States when we were first starting out. Every single state had its own currency, just like we all have our different license plates. Every state had its own currency. When we went federal, we basically became a franchise. Like I was saying before, and I think this leans a little bit into what Tim is talking about. Is now that we've gone franchise, we've kind of lost the beauty of what was of, you know what, if that's what that state wants to do, by all means, more power to them. Now, granted, I think we're kind of coming a little bit to the crux of what the whole Civil War was about, right? Because again, eject the slavery aspect, okay? Because I know everybody's going to just jump to that, but this is kind of the points of semantics that they were arguing and saying, well, I don't think the federal government has a right to do any of this. I mean, even Lincoln himself said, if I could like end the war, if I could end the war without having to end slavery, I would do it. However, one thing that is ejected from the history books, he also did not want to take loans from foreign banks. And what happened to him? Dead. JFK did not want to take loans from foreign banks. What happened to him? Dead. You keep going down the line. I mean, you could go overseas, and you'll get what's his name? Gaddafi.
Oh yeah,
Right?
Saddam,
Yeah, it's right. The pattern consistent
Assad.
is if you do not comply with the corporation or the federation, imperialism in
Yeah.
essence, then you are an enemy of the state. And unfortunately, that's where we get goons like ICE that come out and say, well, I'll readily beat somebody up or call somebody else a minority if it's for the good and behalf of the state. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about is when we get to the point where I am part of the federal agency. I am part of the franchise. I have to do it because my boss tells me I have to do it.
Hmm.
You're starting to lose the sovereignty of being an individual. And I'll end with this because I was working in a company and I said to myself at one point, you have to respect dirt. Because what I was noticing with a lot of people that were in the corporate offices and stuff like that, they love walking off all these immigrants, right? If they're from Russia, Ukraine, Jamaica, barely can speak English, so they can't articulate their rights. But when you get one person like me that says, I'll ask that question, they hate that. And why do you have to respect dirt? Because without dirt, you got nothing to walk on. Not that I'm advocating that's what you want to do, but it's the premise is that that machine will not run unless I push the button. That product will not get moved unless I voluntarily extend my arms and my legs to get it to where you want it to go. So I think that's kind of the concept that we're trying to bring it down to the very individual and minute aspect of sovereignty. If I'm not being represented by the franchise, then the franchise is going to exploit me. And that goes into state rights. Manny, respond, and then we'll move
Well,
on to the next
fellas,
point.
a lot has been said.
Yes.
A lot has been said. Um, as someone who has lived off grid, who loves living off grid,
Nice.
who intends on purchasing more property off grid and living off grid, because I feel the most free when I'm off grid. And it's not
Amen.
because I am somehow disconnected from the state. It is because my life becomes simple.
Yep.
What do I mean by this? Right. So if I live in the city, which I grew up in the city all my life, and I love the city, and I actually have a place in the city as well that I co-maintain with a group of other people. If I live in the city, we're relying on very complex series of systems working together in order to keep everything running. One cog goes wrong and the whole thing starts to fracture, right? And so life might be very easy in the city, but it's very complicated, right? While when I'm off grid and I'm splitting firewood for my stove, right, my life is very simple. It is also very difficult, right? Um, Taking care of my basic necessities becomes the grand majority of my existence. Taking care of the necessities of the people around me become then the secondary grand majority. There's very little part of my life when I'm living off grid that isn't focused on meeting the needs, the direct needs of myself and the people around me,
Yes.
right? And I find beauty in that. I absolutely find beauty. If as humans, that's all we desire, then that's a great and perfect system. Time has shown us that as humans, we desire more than that, right? Which is why we have begun to grow into larger collectives to design systems that can run autonomously or with very little actual human oversight, right? We have bureaucracies in place that maybe have 100 people working in an office that are overlooking the works of 100,000 people, right? And what that means is it gives us greater freedoms, right? As ironic as that sounds, right? It gives us greater freedom because my life is now freed up. My time is now freed up. I don't actually have to chop my own wood. Right? I
Yeah,
can
but you got to pay
go
half
into
your
greater
income. You got to
pursuits.
pay half your income to this system to exist. So my system,
Half it, half
you
is
would
a
keep
lot.
all your
Half is
income.
a lot, Tim. Half is a
All
lot.
right, 40%. If you live in a city, if you live in a city, you're paying at least 40% in taxes between income tax, Medicaid, Social Security, and state tax and city tax. At least 40%.
Well, and I will say again, under our current system, and
So yeah,
I'm not
but I'm
one.
saying for
Uh,
40% of your income, yeah, you should get something. Shit, I mean, god
Whoa, and
dang.
for 40, correct, and for 40% of my income,
Right.
what I should get is time. What I should get is freedom. What I should get is the ability for creative pursuits, which I do get. Right. My life is no longer consumed with my basic necessities or the burden of the necessities of those around me. I know I'm cared for within that system to an extent or a degree, right? That the system can provide even with minimal involvement from me. So like, a lot has been said, and I'm trying to I'm trying to get it into a concise response. But I think it was worth noting, right, that there are benefits to the way that we organize, whether that's more local, whether that's into larger collectives for greater individualistic pursuits, right? I think the individual is always at the heart of what we're trying to do, right? Some people are fine with less uh, some people are fine with simpler and less opportunistic lives for creative pursuits. Some people are not. Some people want maybe perhaps a bit more complexity to their lives, but greater
I don't.
opportunities for creative pursuits.
Can I make one point there? I
Yeah.
don't. I think the making the analogy of living off grid compared to living in a city and saying one is simpler than the other. I don't know. I don't think that's a good comparison because you want a simple
Okay.
life, live in an apartment,
Mm.
go to work, and you will own nothing and you will eat the bugs. I mean, like that's a
Well,
simple life.
and this is why I say, for me, there's a distinction between simplicity, ease, and ease, right? So the apartment life is easy.
Yeah,
It's really easy to live in the apartment and to clock in and to
if
clock
you can
out.
afford it. But yeah,
But right, sure, but it's highly complex, right? And part of the complexity is the fact that you have to afford it, right? And so I've become sick, and under this system, we don't have a whole lot of sick leave, right? And so all of a sudden, can I pay my rent this month, right? It's a series of very complex systems that I'm participating in, and as soon as one thing goes wrong, the ease to continue that becomes very difficult, right? Um,
but
but
you
the
pay forty
life.
percent of your income, so there ought to be something there to help you with that, right?
Yeah, and there are currently right now there are several systems in place, and things that we can take advantage of throughout those moments, right? I think they could be better. I think they should be better. I think they're still exploitative in their current form. Um, but I will say that when I'm in the city, when I'm in the apartment, having the easy life, so to speak, right? My mind is consumed with the complexities of what I'm taking part in, right? My rest isn't even very restful, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, and I
I'm
agree with that.
consistently,
That's
yeah,
why I'm
like
not
I'm,
off grid, but that's why I'm more out in the country. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying there. I do.
yeah,
We
and
just get off
well, when
on
I'm off,
maybe the semantics of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, 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 when I'm off grid, my life isn't consumed with
Yeah.
what my role or part in the complex systems I'm taking part in is, right? I'm far removed from those complexities, right? And so I have the sort of mental freedom to not. And so there is a sacrifice that one makes regardless of where on this spectrum of possibility of human organization we want to fall within, right? You can have greater mental capacity, freedom, and ease, or you can have greater creative opportunity out and engagement opportunities, right? But there's a cost. There's a cost to the individual, and the individual has the right to make that choice, right? I think that's what's really important here.
Yes, but I don't have the right to make that choice. Is the point I'm trying to make? I don't. I have to fund everybody safety net because they might get laid off, and I have to fund you know everybody's infrastructure in their city. I have to I'm not just out here just getting to make my own world. I have to be a part of yours or not, theirs, whether I want to or
Sure.
not. That's my problem. Is
Well, and I think it's an unfair statement to say that somehow your involvement um, provides you either with less freedoms or less rights or less ability to grow your own communities
it,
and to better your own communities. In
it
fact,
it
what
leaves me
I
with
think
less
the data
money.
supports, well, I think, in fact, what the data supports is that having smaller systems like small counties and municipalities that are in more rural areas being engaged into a larger collective pool of resources actually sees that the resources aren't being siphoned from the small community into the large pool, but in fact, the large pool is giving back to that small community much more than it ever gave in. I mean, this is why blue states support red states,
Well,
right?
yes,
Like,
but
like we
that
see
that
that
has more
what the
to
data
do.
shows,
Okay, okay,
what the
okay. Let's
data
calm
shows
down.
is that small communities benefit
No,
from
no,
this
but
system.
that has more to do with politicians being politicians and just making sure they get more money for their state. I mean, but it's still stolen money. You can't get away from that. It's stolen money. So you can say, well, it's funneled back to the people, but it's not though. It's taken from me. In the state I live in, Virginia, you can still homeschool your kids. I homeschool my kids, but I don't get that money back that I pay in state taxes. I don't get a voucher for that. So where's the individual? Where is the ability for the individual to live free, as you just said? That's why you like living off grid. It's that opportunity for you to feel like you're free. Where is that for me? I don't want to be involved in public school systems. I hate the public school system. I don't want to fund it, but I'm forced to.
I'm okay. I'm gonna reserve some of my thoughts because Brandon, I see you itching. I will just say this, right? The idea of we should have the right to um, elect what taxation we're a part of and not a part of. I think one reduces our individual freedoms to maneuver in and out of systems as we evolve as individuals and as we desire different things throughout portions of our lives. Also, more importantly, there's prime examples of this happening. For example, in many communities, mostly rural communities across the United States, there are privatized firehouses, right? And so you pay a small optional tax, like $75 a year in most of these places, somewhere around that, to have fire protection on your home and property. If you don't pay that, they'll watch your house burn down if it sets on fire. And we
No,
have prime
that's not the
examples
case.
of
No,
this happening.
no, they
So
usually come and put it out. They come and put it out. You just get a bill.
we have prime examples of this happening in some communities
No, they
where,
have not
for
just sat and
example,
watched the house
All right, all
burn
right.
down. That's
there
just
was an
that's
older gentleman whose house he forgot to pay the bill because in older age and his wife had passed and he was grieving his wife and forgot to pay the bill that year. His house was set on fire. The fire department dispatched. They waited until the fire spread to his neighbor's fence, then put out the fire on the fence because that was his neighbor's property and as to not disturb his neighbor's um,
I don't
because he
know.
had paid the $75 and watched this man's house burn to the ground with all of his possessions in it.
If that
A
if that
man
is a
in his
real
late 70s.
if that is a
And,
real example, I would say that's it's one real example.
well, my
And
point is
because
that
my
when
point
we
is,
opt
we have a
in,
voluntary fire
All right,
department in the
all right.
town I live in.
Tim, let's reel it
Okay,
back. Let's let Manny finish his
and where
point.
your
I hear what you're
town
saying. All right.
and where your town is, right? You guys have decided we're going to have a voluntary fire department, but we're also going to do it in this way. In that town, they decided to do it a different way, right? And so, my point being is that when we have these elective systems of I'm going to pay taxes for this, but I'm not going to pay taxes for that, and then I don't know that I'm depriving myself of some need down the line that may or may not come for me. People get hurt under those systems, right? And if we're trying to say what we're trying to do is avoid harm and unintentional harm, I think collective power is far more capable than realizing that minimization of harm.
Okay. What about getting 30 to 40% of your income stolen? What about that harm? Nobody wants to talk about that. It's always this collective harm, the society. But what about the individual that gets stolen 30 to
I don't
40% of their income?
I don't view my taxation as theft. I
Really?
view my taxation, correct. I view my taxation as the um, inherited agreement of
Mm.
my participation as a member of this state.
Hey, I'll
And
put it. I'll put it
if I want to
like
avoid my taxation and not take the benefits of this state and its system that I've inherited, I'm free to leave the state. At any point, I can denounce my statehood, right? And I can
yeah.
leave the state, right? But I choose to remain a member of this state because I believe that I am benefiting from being a member of this state.
Have
At
you ever
any point, if I yeah,
have
go
you ever
ahead.
sent in extra taxes? Like, because you enjoy it so much, you think it's a privilege. Have you ever sent in extra? Be like, I'm going to send the IRS a little bit extra this year, or you
No, but
try
I've
to you try
donated.
to you try to get where it's just the bare minimum because you realize deep down it is theft.
I don't see it that way.
Okay.
Okay. Let's
I
agree to
don't agree
disagree
where some
here.
of my taxes are going.
Yeah.
I don't agree with some of my taxes are going, and I think there should be some change.
Well,
Yeah,
then, if you
but
don't
I don't
agree
view it
with
as
where
that.
your taxes are going, then how can you
Some
support the fact that you're sending in
where
taxes?
some of my taxes are going. I don't
Okay.
agree with some of my taxes are going. Yeah, and I think that there should be some change to what we do with our taxes, and particularly in the decision making process of how we collectively decide where our collective resources go. We've pulled our resources together, and I think we should have more involvement and say into where then those resources then
Well, as Lysander Spooner said, I'm going to paraphrase him. Lysander Spooner said of the Constitution, you're talking about there's this social contract and that we have signed it, and that's why we pay taxes. I didn't sign shit.
no, we inherited it. We
Oh,
inherited the
oh,
agreement.
mm,
Yeah.
okay.
And so we don't have any control over our inheritance. We can own the only control we have is what we do with our inheritance. Right. And so there are people in other parts of the globe that are inheriting better. There are people in other parts of the globe that are inheriting worse, far worse. We can see that. Right. And so this is what we've inherited. And we have some kind of duty to what we've inherited. Because the only thing we can control is what we do with our inheritance.
All right. Wonderful. We'll end that segment there. I personally do lean a little bit towards that property is the modern version of statist sharecropping, where you have to pay for an agreement with the IRS. Not that I condone that by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that is basically where we start getting into the modern slave state solution, as said formerly by the UK Prime Minister. I think that is exactly what Tim is trying to convey. Is basically saying if I have inherited this, then why do I feel like I am forced to comply with this said inheritance? Inheritance, you would almost think would be something beneficial, but in
Yeah.
fact, it seems that it's like a shackle. So I think that's kind of where we're having a little bit of a disagreement. You're seeing there's benefits with this relationship, which again, Constitution seems to be indicating that you have the right to rebel if you disagree with this. Constitution, the word itself, derives from the Latin meaning "I agree to this." But
Contract.
yeah,
Contract. Yeah.
as Tim just conveyed, I didn't sign shit. So again, all the founding fathers did, all these wealthy bureaucrats and stuff like that, these merchants, they signed the Constitution, and we're just obliged to comply. And I think this is where they're going to start framing domestic terrorists, because they're basically saying, well, I don't agree with this. I'm sorry. Oh, so you don't want to be part of this contract? Well, we'll deport you now with ICE, right? And you just broaden that whole thing because you're basically saying, I don't like this contract anymore. Well, if you don't like America, why don't you just leave? Well, it costs about
Well,
$2,500 something in order to do so, and most people don't have that spare change lying around because of the IRS. Manny, I will give you a chance to respond, but I kind of would like to move into point two because I'm not sure how both your guys' time is. Both great points that you guys are bringing up. So I'm going to read. If people want to take notes, as I see both you guys are doing, feel free. Property, the agreement, yeah, this is going to be with each guy's own perspective. This is the central disagreement, and I think this kind of tails into what we were kind of leaning into. This is the fault line where they split completely, these three individuals. Rothbard says absolute property rights. Property equals moral extension of the self. Land ownership is legitimate forever, if originally homesteaded or traded. Rent, profit, and interest all are legitimate. Wage labor, fully voluntary. The goal, eliminate the state, so capitalism becomes pure. If coercion disappears, capitalism becomes justice. Parenti argues social ownership of productive power. Property that produces profit from others' labor equals exploitation. Large industries must be democratically controlled, accepts small private property, rejects capitalist class ownership, and the goal, prevent wealth, concentration, and class domination. The issue is not markets, it is a class power. And finally, with the mutualism aspect with Proudhon, possession, not property. His famous distinction is property is theft, property is liberty. He meant two different things. Type allowed and why. Personal possessions, yes. You use it, productive property, used to extract rent. No, you rule it through it. Land belongs to the users. Factories belong to workers operating them, and ownership exists only while actively used. The goal is end exploitation without abolishing the exchange. Now, I think I'm going to let Tim start, if that's okay, Manny, or do you want? Or
Let's go.
Tim?
Let me start.
All right, let's start with Tim, and then we'll go back with Manny.
Oh no, I just said why you always got to let me start. I feel like I'm starting
Oh,
off
by
already.
all means, we'll go with Manny then. With
Yeah,
that
yeah.
being said, because you're an individual and I respect your rights.
um, yeah, I'm of the mind of the common ground there. Really, I love the concept of the commons. I love the idea that um, territorial ownership versus long-term established contractual ownership makes just more sense. I think there's again complexities into these thoughts, and so I end up in the middle. Something like if a group of people have maintained a space for a very long time, that larger other large groups of people can start to recognize that perhaps we don't need to anymore decide we want to expand our territory and instead would like to just collaborate with the current users of this other territory. And I think that's the beauty of the idea behind the United States, right? Is that these borders exist on some map, right? But each one of them has their own culture that those people are protecting. And you can shift those cultures if it doesn't align with you, if you're born into a state that you don't align with. At some point, you'll recognize, hey, I'm not really aligning to the state's culture, and you can try to find the right state for you. I think that it's beautiful that we have 50 states. I think it's beautiful that there are many counties and cities within those states, all protecting these individualized, smaller sets of cultural norms for their individuals that they're protecting fiercely. I think after a long time, it makes sense to just say, like, yeah, we're not going to try and take over your border, right, and expand ours. We're just going to acknowledge that a border exists. We're going to leave it to whoever is there and whoever is born into that and whoever moves into that, right? And we're going to respect that border and just collaborate with the users within that border for our collective benefit whenever we see necessary or fit. And so I really like the idea of um, there is some more commonality and understanding around um, private ownership is the thing that gets people killed. I, I think we could all agree on that. I think it's the crux of our system, and I think it's what capitalism relies on. And I am just not in favor of any capitalistic form. Um, because it relies on private land ownership under my understanding, right? I don't think capitalism can be enforced without private land ownership. And so if there is private land ownership, then I think we do lose some collective decision making power. We do lose some democratic representation. We do lose some of our own voice because now I can only speak for some small parcel of land as opposed to in a group of people about the land that we're all using. Or even worse, I can't speak to any parcel of land because I haven't been able to buy into it.
Hmm. Well, I think, like you just said, you do kind of fall in the middle with the mutualism aspect. Like the factory would be owned by the workers. Everybody, like if you're part of this area, I speak on behalf of what I represent. The thing is, I think just for a point of clarity, do you think the what your land and or property produces defines who you are as an individual?
Absolutely not.
No. All right. If you go into a little bit more clarity as to why you would be contrary to that.
Uh, I think what I produce is a representation of my capacity, my desires, my willingness, my motivations. I think what quote unquote my land produces, yeah, no. If I have 20 people working on my land, collectively producing something, that's in no way a direct extension of me, right? It says more about those 20 people than it does me. And just because I'm the quoted landowner, right, doesn't somehow now give me the right to claim that everything on that land is a direct extension of me and somehow is without any influence from the people who directly produced what was on that.
But that is your, in fact, your argument of statism, though. Because you say that collectively we own America, so that gives the government, the state, the right to then claim ownership and authority over us. So you reject that idea on a personal property, but yet on a collective idea, you embrace it.
I reject the idea that a I reject the idea that a state's purpose is to be an authority over people. I reject the notion in its entirety. I believe the state's purpose is to represent the people's interests. And I believe that our representative democracy has that at its heart and could function that way. Instead, what we have are individuals that are voted in to be our representatives who then decide amongst themselves that they're going to be our leaders instead, right? And despite how I feel about it, they're going to do whatever's in their best interests, right? And they're going to pad their pockets and they're going to vote however it is that whoever padded their pockets needs them to vote or whatever, despite whether it's in my interest or not being a representative of my interest at all, right? I think the state, as we have it, has failed in its intention to represent us,
But
right?
what
And
about,
has become an authoritative force.
It's state is sharecropping. You're paying money to the IRS, or you're paying their salary, right? When the government shuts down, they somehow still get paid, but they're not representing you in the slightest. Tim, your rebuttal.
what about MAGA? They won
What
the
about MAGA?
majority. I mean, the majority won that election. He won the popular vote. He won the electoral college, Trump. So to them, that was a mandate. We got it. The collective spoke. And so we get these mass deportations and we get ICE acting like a Nazi police state. And we get all this. Why? Because the collective spoke, man. So are you okay with that? Are you okay with MAGA? Because they won.
Okay. Again, a lot said there. The current sitting president of the United States has gone on record several times after he got in office saying that he worked with Elon Musk to actively rig this election. It's insane that he said that, but he said that several times. I just think that's worth noting that the president himself has said it. right? It's not
I mean,
someone else claiming it. It's not someone, the president himself
but
has said it.
the right also claimed that Biden stole the last election, and
Correct, correct.
then the
What a
left
great
before that
tactic.
claimed that Russia did the election for the president
Yeah.
the last
All right,
time.
so
So
And what a
let's agree to
great
concede
tactic.
here. Let's agree to
Well,
concede
so,
here. Both sides can argue this one was rigged, that one was rigged, because we're starting to veer into not property
well,
aspects. We're starting to
correct,
veer
correct. So
right.
if we are, talking about the collective decision, right? It's important to talk about what is actually the collective decision. Now, let's say, and I'll concede the point that they fairly and justly won this election. They What they did not do was gain the right to destroy the contract, right? That they are a part of and meant to represent, right? What ICE is doing, right, is unconstitutional. They're meant to represent the Constitution, and they are not doing that. So what we have are bad dealers
I
who
agree
were
with
really
that.
good businessmen who were able to then convince a bunch of people that they were good businessmen, even though they had bad practices behind them, right? Back to our earlier conversation, right? And then got into a place where now they're abusing the
But
collect.
these same people who, when they were in the other people, the other guys, the left, who maybe you would see more eye to eye with, they
On some
abused.
things.
Yeah, well, they abused the Constitution in the same way. Look at the ATF. The fact that you have a federal police force
Sure,
going after alcohol, tobacco, and
sure.
firearms. That is totally unconstitutional. And yet, they both sides do it.
Right. And so
And
I
I would say
wonder,
with the support of the majority of people, both sides do it.
then if the reasonings we have for a desire for a shift in systems is it because we see that our current, how do I want to word this? Because
Representational system is incredibly
we
flawed.
definitely do have a desire for a systematic change and a series of systematic changes, not just in governing body, not just in economics, not just in the way we approach uh, personal righthood, sovereignty, land ownership, right? Like we definitely have these desires for this change, right? um, I just wonder if the desires for large systematic change are coming from uh, recognizing that people are abusing loopholes within our current system, or if it's because it's in a real belief that in no version our current system can exist in a fairer and more just way.
I
Tim, I
would
will
say
allow you a rebuttal.
it'd be an argument for that the system is corrupt, and I would agree.
Cool.
All right,
I say I
on the
say that
property. Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I say that and I bring that to light, right? Because we continuously are talking about the realities of the system we currently live in and what we're currently facing as Americans across borders today, right? Um, but when we're talking about, what would market socialism look like, or what would anarcho capitalism, is that the term you're using,
Yeah,
Tim?
yeah.
Yeah, like what would that look like, right? Or what would mutualism look like? Um, we're constantly falling into this comparison of like, well, under what we're dealing with now. And it's like, well, I'm not envisioning nor advocating for the continuation of what we have now.
Okay,
Right?
good.
Like I'm also advocating for
Yeah,
change in what we have now. I do believe that regulatory systems should be a part of that change. I believe we've made bad choices. I believe we've made good choices. I think if we look back 250 years, we were a drastically different country, and I would argue that we are a better country now than we were then. Some might disagree with that point, right? But collectively, we have slowly progressed, right, towards better ends, I would argue, for ourselves. Maybe not for the world, but for ourselves, surely.
yeah. Not for the world.
Well, that goes back into what Parenti was saying: is we're exploiting other people in order to seem, prestigious in our own eyes. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Right.
kind of where, if I may, Tim, and then I'll throw it back to you. I think what we're trying to convey in a way without actually saying it, but I'm listening to what both of you are saying. What Tim is trying to advocate: if the system is already effed up, to put it in very blunt terminology, why would we want to keep doing that? Because it's like hitting our head against a brick wall.
Yeah.
What he's suggesting is there's got to be a better way than still utilizing the same damn system. Because obviously, if we're getting a clog in the pipe and we keep trying to solve the clog this way and it's not working, we got to think of a different alternative. And I think what he's sounding like from you, sounding again, I'm just giving a little bit of a clarity here, is that we have to keep using the system, but if we just hit it harder with this other, mallet, it'll finally eventually work in our favor. But I think that's the problem, is that these parasites have gotten into, they have created this system. They have told us that this is the system, this is the only way it can be done. There's no way to change and adapt. And if you do, then you are an enemy of the state. If you try to think outside the box, you're an enemy of the state. If you try to make sales outside of what we tell you and what we regulate, you're an enemy of the state. And then they're going to go send their goons, whether ATF, ICE, so on and so forth. And whoever is in charge at the time, they determine what is legal, what is not legal. And you yourself, the individual, well, basically you're getting because no one's there to speak on your behalf.
But even in a collectivist sense, and let me talk in a collectivist sense, I think the federal government doesn't want you talking anything but federal solutions. It's all federal. It's all this blanket solutions. And the left and the right are totally guilty in it. Even though the right acts like they're for states' rights, they're not. They're for states' rights when the Democrats are in control. Yep. And then the Democrats, hilariously, are for states' rights now that ICE is doing the crazy things that they're doing. But let's just have this collective solution. Okay, I'll go down this collective rabbit trail with you. And you've mentioned it. You've mentioned it, Manny. And this whole idea of 50 states, these individual states, California should be able to be drastically different than Texas. And it's really not that much. People love to, the left and right love to act like it is. It's so different. But in the reality, with the federal government as this overarching boss, they can't do but so much. I mean, we have so many different the federal laws. Somebody wrote a book about that any given day, most people commit 3 federal felonies, 3 a day. So, how can states truly be sovereign and be collective in their own sense with this huge federal government that we have? In these federal armies, like ICE and the ATF, the FBI, all of these groups, the income tax, by far, we pay more federal income tax than we do to any state. So my thing is, if we want to be collectivist and we want to get behind a state, shouldn't we do it on a smaller state basis? Wouldn't that be the better approach? Like the Articles of Confederation, like the original intent of the Constitution with the 10th Amendment being paramount, that I don't even think we need a federal government, but if we do have a federal government, whatever, it needs to be as small as it is intended to be. Shouldn't states be more sovereign than the feds? I mean, that's a question to you. Wouldn't that be a step in the right direction as far as democracy and collectivism?
It's a good question. It's a good question. And I'm going to respond unsurprisingly. No.
No.
And I say that because of a point you brought up earlier. There will always be a monopoly on force. It doesn't matter how small or how large the system. There will always be a monopoly on force. So
But wouldn't it be better to have 50 monopolies instead of 1?
Okay.
But hold on. And I argue that we do. I argue that we do.
No
I
way.
argue that local municipalities have authority.
If we did,
over
the governor
local
of Michigan would have told ICE to get out, and ICE would have left. We do not have 50.
Again,
50.
we have an administration today that is not honoring the Constitution they are meant to uphold. I don't think it's fair.
It doesn't matter about the president. If the governor was sovereign in Michigan, he would say go.
Okay. Tim, I'm gonna have to ask you to just kind of recede a little bit because he did interrupt you. I do hear what you're saying. I hear great points from both of you, but I want Manny to have at least 2 minutes to rebuttal.
I believe that we, on every level, have a certain level of control on our municipal level, our county level, our state level, our federal level, right? Obviously, the further removed you are from that, the less influence you have. Not to say that you have no influence, it's just that your influence is diminished the further you get from your locality. Now, let's hypothetically remove the federal government overnight, and now it's 50 state governments. Well, the conversation will just shift to the monopoly of force that now has become the state. We need to abolish the state, right? Every county and every city and every person will say the state is taking my sovereignty away. We need to abolish the state. Okay, let's abolish the state. Then the monopoly on force becomes the county, and everyone says we need to get rid of the county. The cities and the people that are living out here are being, forced by the county to do things they don't want to do. And so we can take that all the way down, right? And then you're just
And
left with
that's my
yourself.
dream. Sorry, I hate to interrupt you,
And
but
you're
that's my
just
dream. That's my
and
dream.
you're just left with yourself, right? And I want more than just myself. I want more than just myself. I want more for my loved ones than just myself, right? And so because of my desires as a human being, because of my desires as an individual, right? I want to take the compromise of the collective. I truly want to take the compromise of the collective. I understand that when I live my life, every interaction comes at a cost of my freedom. Every time I interact with another person, my freedom is on a very small level compromise, right? Because all of a sudden I'm engaging with someone else and I have to consider their desires, their needs, their wants, whatever it is, right? While we are engaging, even in this conversation right now, to some small scale, my personal freedom is compromised, and I willingly compromise it in order to engage.
Yeah.
Right. And I want greater engagement than what my locality can directly provide me. And I think a lot of people want greater engagement than what their locality can directly provide them, specifically because some locales suck, man. And so I want to engage in something that is maybe more compromising to my freedoms in order to have the benefit of that engagement.
Well, can I just
Yeah, but
one
Tim, you have a
question?
right to respond to
But no,
that.
just one question. If you can't concede that we need to limit federal power and bring it down to states, and you think that the federal government is needed, my question is, why stop there? Why not? Let's go global. Let's have a
I'm
global.
with you.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
with you.
Okay. All right.
I'm with you. I think we live in a globalized economy, and it's actually quite crazy that we don't have a global collective. The closest thing we have is the UN, and the UN did actually help shift millions of people into statehood after the last World War. Um, Grateful for that global collective because millions of people and the generations of those people would have been without statehood and disenfranchised for the rest of their generations without a global collective coming together to ensure that people were placed and placed well in a place that they could be represented and plug into, right, to have the benefit of the collective. And so, yeah, I do believe that in a globalized world, we need to have a globalized system, a series of systems that we all agree,
Well,
right?
will you
I think we,
concede that we don't have a global regulation on the economy? And would you concede that the economy still works on a global mechanism without that regulation? Will you concede to
yeah,
that
and
spontaneous order?
yeah. Oh, well, I can see that that's the reality that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Like I acknowledge that we don't have a lot of global oversight on economics,
Yeah.
and it is functioning globally. And I would say to the detriment of billions of people,
Mm.
billions with a B, right? There are half of the world survives off of less than $6 a day. A third of the world survives off of less than $2 a day. Those people are being exploited to levels we can't even fathom as inheritors of the great United States membership we just were born into,
Yeah.
right? And the realities of that, I believe, would be drastically reduced if there were more global oversight.
If I may rebuttal to that, Manny, in essence, what you were saying before, we inherited this aspect of the Constitution and the society that we have. By extension, you've also admitted that we are benefiting off of said exploitation of other
Yeah,
individuals. Would you not say that's like a modern form of slavery? As long as your brother's in chains and you are benefited off of that, this collective seems to work for me, even though it sucks and
yeah,
someone's getting beaten with a whip on the other side of the
yep,
globe here. You're for that?
nope. but I agree, and I will not deny that that's exactly what's happening,
So
right? And in
where
fact,
would you suggest a compromise of fixing that problem? Because I think that's kind of what the crux of the argument being made here is that if somebody is being exploited on the benefit of the collective that I'm currently in, what's the point of this collective if somebody's being abused? What we want is
well, the only
transparency and freedom for everybody.
I do want transparency and freedom for everyone, which is why
Right, right.
which is why I'm an advocate of the membership of a collective, right? If you are disenfranchised by that collective, if you have no voice in that collective, that's fucked. That's a system that doesn't work. That's a system that's not for you. That's a system that you're not even born into. That's a system that rules over you, right? But if you are a member of the collective, if you have a voice, right? If you have the ability to influence the collective, yeah, then you're on equal footing. Then welcome. You're here. Change what you want to change.
Well,
Change what you want to change.
I think that's also where we would start arguing and agreeing is that America keeps saying liberty and justice for all. We go over there, we say we're bringing them democracy, even though we're a republic, ironically enough. We're going over there, we're bringing you a democracy, and we're going to extract all of your resources as a country as a whole. But don't worry, we're bringing you democracy. We set up a puppet, and we're telling you it's good. Don't worry, you're going to be just like America. We're now forcing that on somebody else, right? And that's not necessarily something they agreed to. But then said country, either whether communism, capitalism, for whatever it is, they start exploiting their citizens. And again, it doesn't seem to be fixing the problem. I think what we're trying to establish here, federalism ultimately is a modern form of feudalism. It is a class system, the citizen being the new slave.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to say is, I don't agree with you saying that you, the parasite, get to dictate me, the people, what is and isn't just. Because somehow you can still do insider trading. Somehow you can still do lobbying. You can make all this profit and money off of
Are we
exploiting the
making the
system as it
claim?
is.
Are we making the claim that our federalized government has been immune to change and amendment over 250 years? Is that the premise we're working off here? Because the data would support that our Constitution and our federal government in its functioning has changed drastically over the last 250 years.
And I would say the Amendment 13 is exactly the problem of all of this, is that it created a slave class state where basically
But
prisoners are
I
second class
bring that
citizens.
idea up.
Yeah.
I bring that idea up because if it has changed, it can be changed. The idea that
But
because its current form is bad, the whole thing should be abolished, right? Is then
to
to
my point,
say it's incapable of change.
All
to
right,
my
we'll
point,
let Tim say something.
the federal government has changed. Yes, I will totally concede that. But has it gotten bigger, or has it ever gotten smaller?
Hmm. I think it's gotten bigger, and I think it's gotten bigger in two parts. One, because we do have these larger corporations that are crossing state lines, and so therefore now need federal regulation so that they don't become exploitative, even though we see that they are. So what that tells me logically is that we don't have enough regulation, not that we should reduce it. Um, and um, and because again we wanted to collectively protect what we were all sharing, right? And so yeah, it's gotten bigger. I think it's gotten bigger in some ways that are absolutely to the benefit of the average American, and in some ways to the detriment. But I think things like, the EPA, I think things like the USDA, I think things like the FDA, right? Like these regulatory agencies are not dealing with your average person, right? They're dealing with huge, huge national organizations, right? And regulating those huge national organizations to say, hey, you can't dump that into our water systems, okay, makes the average American freer because they don't have to worry about their water now.
Well,
Right?
I
Without
don't
those
think
regulatory agencies, right, the current standing corporations would absolutely just dump into the water.
I don't think that you can say that the EPA and the USDA and the FDA doesn't apply to their every man, because it clearly does. Because I
It
am
applies to
supposed,
every business owner.
yes, it does. Because
Yeah,
just me selling my meat, I'm supposed to go through the FDA. I'm supposed to go to a butcher that
yeah,
is FDA approved. I don't, because I'm like, I don't care.
yeah,
But I'm supposed to. So it does
yeah.
affect me. I am in. I'm breaking the law by doing what I'm doing. So you can't act like it's only an overreaching authority for the big guys because it's not.
Well, the authority exists. Um, the authority exists in order to minimize damage. The big guys are the ones that have the most potential to cause damage. I will meet you and say that there is overreach, right? That the idea that we have to regulate all processes and all um, corporations, right? I think is unfair and unjust, right? Especially if what we're trying to do is plug in, if what we're trying to do is play a part of this damn fucking sorry, I keep cursing. This game that we've inherited, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, I incorporated my business. I did the thing I was supposed to do. Everyone around me knows what I'm up to and what I exist for, right? But now all of a sudden you want to come in and tell me I have to do it this way, and I'm only serving a population of 100,000 people. Get out of here. The 100,000 people here can decide whether or not I should stay or not,
Yeah.
right? With my intentions and my practices. I'm with you there,
So
right? Like the
we
USDA
agree.
should not,
We agree on a
but
local, a smaller level. You just lose me as we compound.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that
yeah.
okay?
If you're shipping
Okay,
across
that's
state
fair.
lines, then federal oversight.
But all right. So if the little local community can agree to govern itself, and then I'm shipping to another little local community, couldn't they then just govern themselves as well?
So
Like,
I'm not saying that local communities shouldn't be able to govern themselves. In fact, I think that under our system, local communities have the ability to govern themselves. We have local boards, we have local committees, we have
but
local,
not
right?
without the
Like
federal overreach, is what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying.
I mean, because
You know, I
the
just
feds would come after me for my meat, not the city or the state. The feds would come
right.
after me.
And so again, I think that the way current enforcement of regulatory agencies, policies, rules, laws are in place, I think are misplaced. I think the thought about having this federal oversight, about having state oversight, about having county oversight, about having city ordinance, right, all the way down, I think it's well placed. I think the idea is well placed. Are we just not allowed to fail as a collective, right? If the individual has the right to fail, right? I make mistakes all the time. And I'll tell you what, they're easier to swallow when they're my mistakes,
Yeah.
right? If I crash my car, it's easier to swallow than if I let my friend borrow my car and he crashed it, right? Like, honest mistakes, but easier to swallow if it's just mine,
Yeah.
right? Are collectives just not allowed to fail? Right? Hey,
All right.
collectively, we have this really good idea.
Okay,
We
All
okay.
right.
want to be able to regulate for our benefit, right?
Yes.
We have done a lot of really good here. Some of the way we're doing it we're now seeing as harmful. We didn't know. We now know. Are we just we're going to abolish it because we failed off the start?
But all right. So are collectives allowed then? If yes, they can fail, but then they should be able to feel that failure, is what I'm saying. Because if an individual fails, I feel it, whether in my pocketbook or physically, or whatever. Collectives, they don't have any pain. They don't ever feel that failure. Is my point.
The failure of my country, I'm feeling it.
Individually, yes, but I'm talking about collectively. There's never any punishment for failure. Never any. They just get more money, and we'll try it again.
Are we not
If a
saying
business if a business ran like the federal government, it would be out of business. Be out of
oh,
business.
of course, the federal government should not be treated like a business. It's not a business. Its point isn't to make profit. Its
So wait,
point
wait.
is to take care of its people.
So
It should
you're
not
saying
function like a business.
you're saying a business then has more the more ability to be regulated naturally than the federal government. Because if a business
Business.
fucks up, it's going to feel the wrath of people. But a federal government, not so much.
Okay, let's pause
That
there because you guys are breaching into a new category. So I just want to kind of add this, incorporate in what we were talking about. I find it ironic that I'm wearing a shirt that says corporate manslaughter as you
Yeah, I
guys
got
start going into this.
I got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so I mean.
Oh, nice, nice. So with that being said, because I love how the conversation is organically already expounding into this category, markets. Thinker markets. And why? Well, Rothbard, essential markets maximize freedom. Parenti, limited markets produce inequality. And Pradhoon, yes, but reconstructed markets without capitalism. Now, what I'm going to give on the behalf of Proudhoon, I think what he is trying to distinguish is the concept of usury and or making interest on certain things. Is like you can give me just basic of what the what it's going to cost to cut up the land, the time, the labor, and what it's going to do for to make sure you have a sustainable living. Whereas charging interest, you're charging basically, the biblically speaking, you're charging interest on time, which is labor that is, God gave us time, so why are you charging interest on something that has yet to occur? So you're basically robbing time from somebody in the future. Don't look at me like that, Tim. This is biblically. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. If you don't like it, yeah, no, I'm just teasing you. I'm just teasing
I
you.
know, I know, I know.
An important distinction: Rothbard, capitalist markets; Proudhon, cooperative markets. Again, where you're not trying to, one up somebody or basically be an a-hole with how you're trying to be a good businessman, as Manny was making it out. And then Parenti, socialized key sectors. Now, that being said, I just kind of wanted to throw this into the works. What Manny was implying with the global aspect. Now, I already said before, as we started out as a country, when you're reading that book that I remembered, I think it was Charles Beard, looking at the Constitution again from economic standpoint. Yes, they were trying to make merchant and make it for corporations. Just like right now, our government is making all these deals with Palantir and all
Yeah.
these technocrats and making plans for how they're going to renovate Greenland for their own profit and means. Now, as we said before, each state originally had its own form of currency, then it became federalized. Manny, with that being said, and as Tim has been kind of pushing back against, at a certain point, if said federal government tries to capitalize upon that and makes it a global currency, a one world currency, where let's say the only way you could have access to it is giving your autonomy of a thumbprint and or an eye scan. That is the only way you're able to access your funds. Is that something you would agree with if it's good for the collective?
My instinct is no.
Okay, fair.
The slight hesitancy is only in I'd want to find a system in which that wasn't required. It becomes much more difficult when you are getting into larger and larger systems
Right.
to discover ways to protect autonomy and agency. Because again, the more we engage and the more we're participating in a collective of, the more of our own personal freedom we are giving up in order to participate, to engage. Um, and so I think life is a balance of trying to figure out, how much engagement is vital to me in my pursuits as an individual here, and to follow my own desires. And so, therefore, how much of my personal freedoms am I willing to compromise in order to engage with a collective that gives me access to?
You literally just encapsulated everything that Tim has been trying to advocate, which is beautiful because I think that's exactly what he's trying to convey. Is it at a certain point, when do you draw the line and say, I'm not going another
You
step further
personally
with
draw the
this
line.
contract? Well, that's what
You
I'm saying.
personally
When
draw
do
the
you
line.
personally say, I'm cutting ties, I'm cutting bait, this is no longer working out for me?
Trial and error. I say that because I have been more plugged in at times and I've been more removed at times. And at times, both of those were the right thing for me, right? Where I needed more engagement in my life to help collectively process things I was going through. And then there were times where I needed to get away for a while and process solitarily for a while, right? And that was the right decision for me to do. Now, I've overstayed my need in both of those, and I've indulged into both of those past my need, and both of those have then become my detriment, right?
Mm.
The thing I need today will one day become my detriment if it becomes my sole pursuit. Um, and so I believe that the individual chooses as they need. Um, and hopefully they learn themselves well enough that as they grow and evolve, they learn to recognize when that need shifts into indulgence quicker and are able to get to whatever it is they need at that time. And they make
Here,
the
so
compromises
last thing
necessary
I'll
to do
say,
so.
and then I'll throw it over to Tim.
Yeah.
Saying that this is like the only means, let's say they push us into a corner and they say this is the only way you're going to be able to buy or sell if you want to be part of this collective to continue any further. Now, for the good, the peace, and safety of everybody in this collective, would you say that that is something you would be a proponent of? if push comes to shove, and this is the only way and means you're able to participate in society of this
But it
contract.
wouldn't be.
So you
But
would
it
have,
wouldn't be.
well, that's what I'm
Well,
saying. But
what I'm saying is that it wouldn't be. The ability to form, to maintain, to sustain local markets always falls on the locality that you are in. It doesn't matter what version you have and how much oversight you try to put into it and how much you try to tell it to be what it is, right? I can always barter with you. I can always barter with you. I don't
Amen.
need the currency. I don't need it, right? I
thank you.
only need the
Hey,
currency if I want to engage on a larger scale.
you
If I
sound like
want
an
to engage
anarchist.
outside of my locality.
You sound like an anarchist, man. Welcome to the black market, Manny. I love it. Yes.
Well, again, this is where I'm trying to cultivate. Is I think we do agree. We're just kind of a little bit at a certain point, like what Manny was
Yeah.
saying. At a certain point, okay,
But
now the council board is the bad guy. Now this group's the bad guy. I understand what he's saying, but I think this comes to a little point where it's like you need to have some elders, you need to have some people in the tribe, the chief, if you will. He got there for a reason. He got old for a reason. You should respect wisdom from age, right, and experience. Tim, your rebuttal.
yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what he said there. And the whole thing that he said he chooses the collective. That I wholeheartedly agree with. You should be able to choose the collective that you're a part of, whether that's at small or broad, or whether that changes over time. You need time. I just need to be like it's just me and my wife for a couple of weeks, and then it gets bigger, and I want to be a part of a community thing. I want to do something with my church. I want to do something with whatever. Fill in the blanks. But that is you choosing the collective. When you say I have to be part of these United States of America, and I've got to be part of the magic song and the magic cloth, what do you call it? Sky cloth. And I've got to be a part of all these things. That's where I draw the line. I don't want to be. I don't want to have to pay into this system. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want anything from the federal government. Leave me alone. I should have every right as an individual to choose my collective. That's my main point. And then you got into black markets, man. Like your main thing is regulation should be for a federal level, a national level. Okay. And then you realize that like a mark of the beast type system wouldn't work in a small community, because there's always barter, there's always the black market, and that's how I live my life. I mean, I hate the government. I know there's not any way that I'm going to defeat the federal government. Not going to do it, but I can sure as hell live outside of it as much as I can, and that's my main focus,
Nice.
is to live outside of the state.
Manny, anything you want to say before we go on to the next point? It's a lot less heated on
Um,
this next one, I should think.
I I just think that the choice to choose your collective only exists if the opportunity is afforded to you. And if there weren't generations of individuals that had built systems that they had inherited, paid into, were a part of, continued on, then I wouldn't have the choice today to choose my collective. And in fact, not only to choose my collective, but to freely move between collectives, to freely move between collectives, to have the freedom to pursue as I evolve as a human being, the desires that change for me, that needs that change for me with ease, with a level of ease. I do believe that collective buy-in gives us more freedoms.
Yeah, I
It
think that's
allows me to leave locality. It allows me to leave locality. A lot of people are stuck in locales, right? That they would rather not be in, right? And they don't have the opportunity to just choose their collective. They're stuck in the collective that they inherited because there's no availability to leave it. There's no ease of mechanism to
But I think a
shift
lot of
into a larger engaged core like a metropolitan city to then shift out of and back to wherever it is they want to go, right? Like that exists because of the collective.
I think a lot of it though is your ability. You're shooting yourself
Some of
short.
it is certainly down to your ability. Yeah.
You're a smart guy. I can just tell without talking to you, and so your ability allows you to move from collective to collective. I don't think you're stuck. Or these people are stuck because of lack of collective. I think they're stuck. A lot of the times is because they have no ambition. They have no ability. I mean, they just, and it's harsh to say, and people say that you shouldn't say that, but there is such thing as ability, and some people have it, and some people don't. And
I,
Or they
yeah, I
surrendered
agree
their
with
means of that.
I
Go ahead.
I I
yeah,
I agree, and again, this is like the morality of the collective is what brings like arguments like this bring me back to it, right? I want to enable those who are not able as much as possible. I'll gladly pay into a system that creates other systems within it to try and give people that are less able greater chances of mobility, right? Also, on top of that, the idea that some people lack ambition or motivation, I also agree with. I think that's a product of the illusion of disenfranchisement. And I word it like that very specifically because these are not disenfranchised people. These are people that are members of this society that have been told over and over and over again, you have no power. You have no authority. You have no ability to change this, right? When in fact, collectively, that's literally all the power we hold. Right, and so their ambition, their motivations have been systematically stripped from them through the internalization of this narrative, right, for the exploitative benefit, right, of those who would engage.
yeah. But I think
um
they are stripped of that title, that ability of to think of themselves in that way because of this collectivist thinking and this idea of the
sure,
federal government.
sure.
Because if you take if you start to look at the collective to the extreme, you diminish the
Mm-hmm.
individual. And then so how can anybody
Yeah,
think anything of themselves if they're not an individual first?
yeah, I agree with you, Tim, and I'm all for empowering the individual. In fact, I named my organization the Team of Empowered Allies. I think that the most important thing is to empower the individual and localities to be able to actually be in a well empowered position to advocate for themselves on a more grander collective scale, right? Like if we lose that, which I think we have in the United States, right? Like
Yeah.
that this whole thing is really broken,
Right.
right? Like the idea that we should be of the people, by the people, for the people, right, is really still in my heart, and as an American, I still feel. And so I'm always for empowering the individual. There was one last thing I really wanted to say on this, and I'm hoping it comes back to me because I've lost it in this train here, but I think we're on something really good. Um, that oh, right, like the disillusionment by looking at our influence on a larger scale, right? You know, it's like I have so little influence on the federal scale, and so therefore I am disempowered, right? And I do think that the focus of power is backwards, right? I have a lot of power in my locality. I
Yeah.
have a lot of power in my city and in my county and in my state and in my government. But as I start to shift out of that power and I um, start to prioritize having power on a larger scale, and then am confronted with the fact that I don't have a lot of influence there, I then disillusion myself into believing I don't have any power anywhere. Right? It's a real terrible thing that's happened here in the United States. Um, but uh, some of the ways I try to reframe that, right, is like earlier you were talking about like what is the power of a federal vote, right? It's like 0.00 not of a percent, right? Um, I actively fight that narrative, right? No, it's not just 0.00 not, right? You are voting on what is arguably the most powerful political seat in the globe, right? And there are billions of people who have no say, none at all in that. And you are part of a small collective of just a few hundred million. And your vote is voting with the power of hundreds of millions of voices behind it. That is a lot of power. That is a lot of influence, not just in our nation, but on the global scale, right? And so to be disillusioned to the idea that somehow I shouldn't cast my vote on the federal level because it holds no power, and then transfer that to I shouldn't cast my vote on any level because it holds no power. I'm going to stop attending my school board meetings. I'm going to stop attending my city council meetings. I'm going to stop attending my county commissioners meetings. I'm going to stop listening to what's happening on my state level because I have no power. right, is a great disservice to not just us as Americans, not just to us as individuals in our localities, right, but to the globe at large, right? We have a lot of power, and I think it's really important that we honor it and reclaim it if there's any chance of any of the changes we've been talking about today occur.
See, this is
Well,
exactly why another reason why I picked Parenti for you, Manny, because while I agree with a lot of his arguments, this is where both Tim and I do align, is that we disagree with the aspect that we still need the state to define that. Not to say that you don't have merit with what your argument is, but that's where we do disagree. Tim, I'm going to go into the next phase, if that's okay, or was it a very serious rebuttal that you wanted to?
no, I just wanted to say I just can't take it necessarily a whole lot serious when you say we have power in a federal election when it comes down to two choices every year, or every 4 years, and they're usually handpicked. So I don't know. I think it's an illusion of power, and I think people get more voiceless the further you go up the governmental scale.
Well, it's like, sorry, the collective conformity aspect. As long as blue is in charge, as long as red is in charge, somebody else is being oppressed because my team won. It's the
Yeah,
same aspect just with like sports. Oh,
yeah,
Patriots won. Though this one's won. Like you become part of it, and you say, well, it's my team. Well, were you on the field? Were you sweating during practice? Were you doing this other thing? Like, no, you weren't doing any of that. But you're claiming that as part of being part of you, and therefore you say you're representing.
Correct.
And that's part of the problem
Were
because at a
you on the
certain
field?
point,
Did you take part in the primaries when there
right?
were 30 choices, right? You're saying there's only two choices, but were you on the field when there were 30,
Well,
right?
again,
Did
we're
you
still
vote in the
talking about two party
primaries?
system here.
it's still a two-party system. Yeah, exactly.
It's still flawed. If you can't get a libertarian or a progressive or somebody else of a totally new,
Oh,
unique
totally.
Green
aspect,
Party, Green Party. I
I
mean,
mean,
we just
seriously,
Totally.
dude, the anarchist candidate would win.
yeah,
Oh, and
Why do you
I'm
think
as
we should
far as
vote
to
for you?
say, I mean, I'm as far as to say, right, that like we're living in a full-blown oligarchy.
yes,
We've blown
Democratic
past
oligarchy. Yeah.
representative democracy and full oligarchy at this point,
yes,
right?
100%.
And I think that's
Um.
represented by the fact that we've always lived in that system to some extent, but
Yeah,
now we
it's more
can all
obvious.
acknowledge it because they can blatantly do what they want and go, "What are you going to do about it?" Right?
Yes,
Right.
Like full blown oligarchy.
Epstein. I mean, wow.
Yeah,
So, in regards to labor and wage work, thinker wage work, Rothbard, voluntary contract, Parenti, structural coercion, Proudhon, transitional necessity, but undesirable. Proudhon's middle position here is wage labor exists because workers lack access to capital. Fixed credit and wage and hierarchy fades away. So basically, it's an alternative solution of if we're already having a problem, as you just stated, we need to start fixing it where it's basically able to be the money is in the hands of the people as opposed to the politicians. Thoughts, gentlemen? I'm going to let Tim start with this one because I had Manny do the last two. If that's
All right,
okay, Mr. Individual.
so what is the actual question? Like, what are we
So
talking about?
the concept is voluntary contract with how you determine, like, okay, so if I
Okay,
think your wage labor
yeah,
is an equivalent to like the average pay salary of the state, whatever it is at this time. Plus, I'm equating for the concept of, okay, we got inflation. If you're a nice boss, so like that is per contract with you and whoever it is you decide to employ. Whereas
yeah,
the other one is saying if it's already structured by the state, like this is what you're supposed to do for mandatory, and you give a bare minimum with whatever raise is supposed to be every 1 to 2 to 3 years, so on and so forth. So now Rothbard is kind of phrasing it as it should be a voluntary contract based on the two individuals. Parenti is saying structural coercion. So basically, like I just
yeah.
said,
I
there's
got
a
all that now.
system.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
heard all that.
And then
Sorry.
Proudhon is
I was just
basically saying it's really kind of undesirable. If anything, we should have almost like a credit trade system. So similar to Rothbard, but a little bit more the aspect where the trade is based off of what you think is right. So basically, if I was working for you at your sheep farm, you're going to give me a room and board and this little shed that you got in the back of the barn or whatever. That's giving this as an idea. And that is the contract we have established of credit, quote unquote, and
yeah,
good faith that because I'm doing labor for you, you're going to offer me this in exchange.
yeah, and I would be okay with probably both of the first and the last
Okay.
positions. Yeah, because it has to do with contracts, voluntary exchange. I will say that I think labor prices should be set. Everybody likes to just talk about, well, minimum wage and what somebody needs to live. I don't think that should come into the argument of what I'm going to pay somebody if I'm a business owner. I shouldn't be thinking of what does this guy need to necessarily live. I've got to be thinking about how I can balance my books.
Right.
Now, secondary to that, I can think, hey, if I want to keep this guy around and I want him to be productive for me for years to come and not just run him off at the first chance he gets to go somewhere else, a better offer. Yes, I'm going to think of things along those lines of, hey, what does this guy need? He's got a family of whatever, but that's secondary to math. Math has to be paramount, and it has to be like if the business does not have the funds to pay somebody a certain amount, so the alternative is, or you got to pay him this amount, then the alternative is the business goes under. Like that's better that businesses go under, and sometimes they should go under. They definitely shouldn't be propped up by the state. Also, this whole idea of everything the cost of living going up every year. Well, who is to blame for that? That's the Federal Reserve. Uh, the Federal Reserve, I mean, almost every year, they do this thing called quantitative easing, where they basically print money out of thin air. And that makes our money worth less money every year. Again, it's why we shouldn't have this overarching collective of money. We should have freedom in money, or even from a collective standpoint, as far as state goes, or even collectivist federal idea of that it's at least backed by gold, backed by something, instead of just faith in the United States government. Because that causes massive inflation, and we've seen it because during COVID they printed and they printed and they printed and they printed again, and we're living the results of it right now. So, in a true voluntary society where you actually had sound money, yeah, contracts are king.
Mm.
I say, hey, I'm going to pay you $50,000 a year, and the guy says, okay, that sounds good to me. We shake hands and everything's great. Like why I don't see why you need a middleman in that process when it's a business deal between a two individuals, two free individuals.
One last thing I'll tack on before I throw it over to Manny. Are you okay with also under the table contracts?
Hell yes.
Okay, cool. I like
100%.
that.
And I think most in AnCapistan, there everything would be under the table.
Yep.
I mean, black markets for the win.
Nice. All right, Manny. Yeah, anything you got to say?
Yeah.
Speak a
I mean, I agree with a lot of what's been said. And contracts are the things that bind agreements, right? They're the things that are recognized even in our current system. They need three relevant things: parties exchange consideration. You have to exchange something for something else, or the contract isn't um, enforceable.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why we get funny things like universities paying a single peppercorn every year for their lease on campuses. It's a real thing that happens every single year. There's a whole ceremony. I think it's Notre Dame that pays a peppercorn for their campus lease. Uh, but technically, there's consideration. There is an exchange that is happening that is agreed by both parties. And someone fact check me on that. Which university is it? Because it's out there.
I'll do it.
Anyways, and under our current systems right now, quote unquote, underground, black market, under the table contracts absolutely do and can exist actually, and are enforceable and can be upheld by law, as long as they have those things. They've got the parties, they've got the consideration, they've got the exchange, right? Then, in fact, I use them at my work all the time. In fact, I'm currently getting paid under those right now.
I love it.
Right now, whether I decide to then report that to the IRS is now on me, the individual, right? Now there are collective consequences prescribed if I do or don't, right? Under the system I currently function under and I'm a member of and exist in, right? And participate in, right? but that decision is left under me, right? Every 1099 contract is this, right? The only employers that report to the IRS what they're paying their employees is if they're W-2 payrolled employees, right? If they're not payrolled employees, if they're 1099 contractors, they're not reporting to the IRS what they're paying that contractor. And that contractor can literally agree to do it at any price, including below minimum wage.
Yeah.
And so the ability to do that still exists. I think when we're talking about things like inflation, what causes prices to go up, we get back to private land ownership. I think it's the crux of this whole thing, right? If the land isn't privately owned, then it can't be privately sold under some term or contract, right? It can be collectively protected, collectively used, collectively enforced, right? But it can't be owned. And so no one can
If I
charge
may,
rent.
would you say your ideal would be very similar to like the national parks in regards to property, that it's a collective, so we can't just, if we sell off this farmland, China could buy this up, Russia could buy that up. Whereas what you're saying is
I
it's
think the
protected.
ideal is closer. I think the ideal is closer to BLM. Right? BLM is publicly uh, owned land. It's maintained through public funds. Very little happens there, and anyone is able to use it at any time for however long they want to use it. You can go out and camp on BLM land. You can't build there because it's collectively owned, and we need to have collective discretion around what happens there. And so, if individuals start to claim it as territories, then all of a sudden our collective lands start to disappear, right? And so, there are some lands currently under our system, BLM lands, Bureau of Land Management manages those areas, where you can go and camp and use it freely for however long as you'd like. The idea that there are some lands publicly that we would collectively say, hey, no one's going to build here, right? No one's going to claim this as territory. We want to preserve some commons that are undisturbed for everyone. I think makes sense. I think if that were extrapolated to more and more land, that, okay, this is land we collectively will build on, right? And this is land we won't, I think would make more sense if we're talking about why the need to maintain work and wages and how increasingly more difficult it becomes to just pay for your livelihood, to participate in this darn thing, right? I think it goes back to land ownership. I am for federalist controls of funds, right? So not something like the Federal Reserve, something that is just our government, not an entity outside of our government that is backed by something other than the faith of the populace. But I think that the greatest problem when it comes to wage labor under our current system, and why people often refer to it as wage slavery, right, is because I only have a certain amount of choice in whether or not I participate or not, right? The consequences and the sacrifices I make to participate or not are so drastic on both ends. I either have to sacrifice so much of my own labor, time, energy for a portion of it back in order to continue to engage in this system, or I disengage from this, right? And then I'm on the outskirts of the collective with minimal resources, opportunities, and mobility. And so I think the idea that wage labor in and of itself is some kind of modern slavery, I think maybe under some different circumstances, it wouldn't be seen as so. Under the current circumstances, absolutely. And I have a friend of mine who recently put it to me even better. I think it's medical slavery system. Because if you don't have a job, how do you get health insurance, right? Or how do you afford healthcare without health insurance under this system, right? And so it's one of those, like, even if I don't need it, in fact, I have a friend right now, longstanding career in her 50s, could absolutely retire right now, does not need to keep working financially, but must work in order to afford healthcare for her and her family. Because through her work, she gets healthcare that is affordable. And so now, it's not even wage slavery, it's just medical slavery. Because if she had healthcare provided to her or access to it in an affordable way, right, she would retire.
Hmm.
Right? The only reason she's working is for the medical.
Well, I will say
Um,
this. I do think a lot of people are ill-informed about, I don't know what state she's in, but they're ill-informed about getting individual insurance for themselves. Most people have this idea that they can only get affordable health insurance if it's through this big company, and that's why they kind of have this idea that they have to stay with them. There's a lot of actual affordable, well, not affordable because we live underneath the Federal Reserve, but cheaper plans out there
yeah.
under private, just individual plans. So yeah, some of that, I think I agree that some of it's real. The fact that this inflation is just killing people,
Yeah.
and the medical field, but look at why the medical field costs so much. It is one of the most highly regulated things in the country.
Mm.
All right. Well, I fact checked you, Manny.
Yeah.
And while it's not exactly agreeing 100% with you, it did stumble me into something that I'm probably going to make a post on because it was like, whoa. It says, while the concept of peppercorn rent, a nominal fee for legal consideration, is common under British law, no major university is famously known for acquiring its entire campus in this way. However, instead, many U.S. schools like Cornell profited heavily from the indigenous lands via 1862 with the Morrill Act that was signed under Lincoln. How 52 American universities built their fortune using 11 million acres of Indian land signed over amid violence, corruption, and coercion. Cambridge University, if people want to look that up. So thank you, Manny, for that side trivia there. Um, Kind of sad, actually. I was reading that going like, damn. So yeah, folks. I think we've all also agreed that money is also a semi-shackle of statism. It's kind of forced us into this aspect where I have to concede to the state, at least that's how people start thinking. I need to work so many hours in order just to basically gain a basic minimum wage to live and survive. And as Tim pointed out, the Federal Reserve is basically exploiting people so that we have to keep doing that. And we're actually paying money into a system that's not even actually backed by any monetary minerals such as silver and or gold. All right, we'll go into the next one, banking and money. Rothbard, 100% private banking, competing currencies, and no central bank. Parenti, public banking and planning for stability, regulated finance. And Proudhon, the most radical idea of the three, mutual credit banking, interest near zero, loans based on labor value, and credit as a public utility, not state run. This is the economic engine of mutualism. Now, Tim, I had Manny go twice in a row. Would you like to go twice in a row and then we throw it back to Manny, or would you like Manny to start with this one?
You can go ahead and start.
All right, Manny. Your thoughts on banking?
Well, I hit on some of them, right?
Right?
I do agree that it should be backed by something tangible. I think the idea for a sort of faith-based currency had merit in its inception. Um, it allows for just a lot more to be done with greater ease, a lot greater engagement into larger exchanges
Right.
with greater ease and without having to compete for tangible resources. So, in some ways, the argument could be made that a non tangibly backed currency reduces um, the the perceived need by states, by collectives of people to go out and then take from others so that they can then have more of those resources hoarded in order to back their supply.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've seen in practice is that although some logical reasoning might conclude that, in practice we've seen quite the opposite, right? Like it hasn't slowed it at all. Like, we're still doing the thing.
Right.
Everyone's still doing the thing. Um, and so I would say that we need to have it backed. Um, I also believe that at this point we have the technology and the ability to make greater engaged choices about how we handle credit to our state, right? So if we look at like the national debt clock right now, per citizen, it's like 112,000-ish dollars. Per tax-paying citizen, it's like 355,000-ish dollars, right? At some point, some generation or series of generations of Americans, if we're ever to get out of under this as a nation to try and reform ourselves, right? Like at some point, um, someone's gonna have to take the burden, right? Someone's gonna have to take the hit. And right now it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Um, and so I think there should be some more engagement in when we are talking about raising our debt, like let's talk to Americans about like, are we willing to assume this debt, right? Because it's being done in our name and we have the technology to be able to ask them directly. This is what it would mean for every household. This is what it would mean for future generations, right? And there should probably be some kind of cap on that, right? You know, each generation can only assume X amount of debt in the name of future generations, right? Like there should be some kind of, because the idea that we shouldn't be able to take credit out on our own perceived abilities, I think would rob us of the ability to do more, right? I absolutely do believe we are capable of more than what we have access to, right? And so increasing our access in order to match our capabilities, I think, is an important component of banking and why the idea of a credit system exists at all. Um, and there's different ways to do that. You guys have touched upon it before.
Right.
Um, there's concept of like a time bank, right? And on a local level, that works really well, where you look at a list of things that people need done. You put in a couple of hours doing this thing for this person. You've just logged those hours into the time bank and can request your thing to be done. And someone with those capabilities can come and spend their time logging, doing that thing for you. And, that is a form of credit. That's a form of banking
Exchange
that
labor.
isn't surrounded around, fiat currency. I think
Right.
fiat currency exists because it allows us to engage in a more abstract way that eases the exchange, right? So more exchange can happen, right? I can exchange something with a guy in India I don't even know, right? With relative ease with fiat currency. Without that, that becomes substantially more difficult.
Fair enough. Tim, your rebuttal.
Well, yeah, definitely against the Federal Reserve. I don't think there's been a more evil thing that's been creative. Even just look at the history of all these guys like J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller and all that they get together on this island, Jekyll Island. I mean, I couldn't write a better.
Titles.
Uh, yeah, it's insane, and they secretly plan this thing. Why? Because it benefits them. Um, I don't know why there would be any mutualist or communist or Marxist that would be in favor of something like the Federal Reserve. You want to talk about benefiting the big banks and benefiting big business, it's the Federal Reserve. Because this thing was created in 1913. Along with it, they had to enact the income tax. And it's enabled, well, let me back up. Who gets the money when they print the money? Because they print it all the time. It's not like it's something that just happens every once in a while, just to catch up. It happens all the time. Does it go to do I get a check? Do you get a check, Manny? Small businesses, workers. Do workers benefit in that? No. It goes to dealer banks. Those are large financial institutions, the treasury bond markets, and the asset markets. Who benefits out of all that? Wall Street,
Hmm.
the stock exchange, uh, all of the so-called evil guys at the left like to talk about. And I, I kind of agree in some aspects. But the Federal Reserve, let me get my notes here. I got a lot of notes on the Federal Reserve. Yeah, so it enables the government to spend more money, and that's the reason the government went along with it. That was it's a private institution, and I mean, you should be against that. And Manny, and I think you are. I think you're against the Fed. I think we agree on that. It's this private institution that enables government. The government's definitely getting something out of it. It enables them to spend more than they earn, because then Treasury bonds are issued, and that the Fed creates the money to buy the government debt, and this artificially lowers interest rates. They always want to keep interest rates low, um, but this doesn't do anything for people that actually want to save. It hurts them. But I mean, even I, as an AnCap, I'm wanting them to lower the interest rates again because I built a house at 6.5, and I'm like, I had a house before that at 3, and so I'm like, I don't care what it's going to do, lower the damn rates, but it doesn't help anybody when they do that. The inflation is hidden financing, and the Federal Reserve allows the government to borrow cheaply by creating money to buy the debt. Without the backstop, deficits would force either higher taxes or spending cuts to happen. I mean, it's just reality. Government would have
Yeah.
to live within their means. And so the Federal Reserve, I think, is one of the biggest evils ever committed on the United States of America, or its people, the American people.
Agreed. I absolutely agree with that. Strictly from a mutualist perspective, I I do lean a little bit into the capitalist aspect, is that competition, but it's also a little bit, again, it leans into what you were saying earlier. It's contract per individual, and those credits should be determined by per parties. I shouldn't be privy to what that is. I shouldn't tax whatever that interaction is. That should be between those individuals. I do not believe that it should be regulated by unscrupulous individuals that are trying to make profit off the ill-gotten means of others. The best way to sum it up. All right. 6-1. Role of the state. Rothbard, abolish immediately. Parenti, democratize it and use it. Prodholm, dissolve gradually through economic alternatives. Prodholm believed that the state dies when hierarchy stops being economically necessary. So I'm going to let Tim start with this one. But I kind of do lean into, because it explains what Manny's talking about gradually. Because I understand we've gotten to a point where it's like, this is what we know. But if we are going to try to start something new, we have to start taking out what is basically feeding them. The intravenously being fed through the IRS, the lobbying, the insider trading. So we need to start fixing that. Now, granted, it's visionary. As you said, going to go up against the whole federal government? No, but let's just talk ideally. If we could do this as a utopian perspective, how would that look like?
Yeah, I'm kind of split on that. I do think a gradual thing would be better. Wouldn't be as much pain. Um, so yeah, I would start with ending the Federal Reserve, and we just talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
That would help a lot. And going back to some type of backed currency, that would start to shore up things, and at least debt wouldn't just be in the trillions. I mean, they would have to start getting the house in order because they just wouldn't have the ability to just print money out of thin air, and then those treasury bonds and be bought, and it just filter down into the banks that are connected to just get this free money that then they can lend to people and charge interest on.
Mm-hmm.
It couldn't happen if the Federal Reserve was gone. So that I think would change things. Do I ever see that happening? No, because it is so many people are connected to that system that they want to allow that to happen. So personally, I think the only way anything changes, and I think the federal government is going to go under. I think the federal government, if not go under, another country will invade. I just think that is it's dark. It's not happy. It's not white pill, but I think it's the reality in which we are living. The only thing, it's like Rome. Rome's going to fall. It's gotten too big. It's gotten too bloated. It's corrupt, and Rome will fall. And so, yeah, I think ultimately Rothbard will win. Because I think this state is going to come crashing down.
Manny, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm not frozen. I'm writing.
um,
Um, I stated before, at some point, right, a group of citizens and generations most likely will have to accept the burden of their inheritance. Um, if there's any chance of survival, right? Because the other alternative, right, is it destroys. It either destroys from the inside out or from the outside in, right? Like it's destroyed one way or the other, right? It begins to fall apart and others come in and help it fall apart, right? And I don't think that for the average American, that would be a better, freer, more rights protected life for them, right? Um, the reality of the world that we live in is that we share the world with billions of humans, not all of us working in good faith. Um, and protecting the sovereignty of our nation means that we have then the ability to even have these conversations, right? Because there is in no world that I can foresee that if our nation's people become idealistic overnight and begin to work in these idealistic um, ways, that the rest of the world would then just join us, right? I think they would take advantage, right? I think they would come in and start to strip us for parts and take over. Um, and then we would be under their control, right? With no say, probably, right? And I think that's the reality of the world that we live in. And I think when we're talking about systematic change and when we're talking about systems, it's important that we bring up the reality that we live in, right? Something like gradual change is the thing that is the only way that I think makes sense. Now, where that change is going, we all have different ideas, but I think gradual change is the thing that least harms the people's everyday lives, right? In fact, I find irony in the idea that so many of Americans, their gripe with federal government is, what do they even do up there? They don't even do anything. Like it doesn't even affect my life, right? And it's like that's good governance. If if they're making drastic changes, it messes with your life, right? Like leave me alone, right? I've just figured out the rules to this game. don't start, messing with them so that I can't engage in a way that allows me to influence, right? In a way that it disempowers me, right? Um, and so I think gradual change is the only good way to make sustainable, long-term, and lasting change that protects people's ability to engage and to influence that change. I think it's why we can see that over the last 250 years, we have made change, but to almost every generation, it felt like nothing was happening. But we definitely live in a different country than we did
mm,
250 years ago, right? And I think there is something greater to be said about our connection with that history, right? There are so many Americans today that just want to say, well, that wasn't me. That wasn't even my lineage, right? It's like, at what point do we accept the consequences, both good and bad, of what we have inherited as our own? I can't say I'm a proud American and then say, yeah, but those parts aren't mine. That's not my America, right? How does that make any sense,
mm,
right? Um, I can't claim ownership, stake, membership, control, influence, right? The benefits, right, of being an American without also accepting the fact that every citizen is $112,774 in debt, according to the national debt clock right now. Right? That is my debt to assume at some point.
Mm.
Americans need to recognize that. Right? Because if we don't, then what we are doing is ensuring that we will be under someone else's control. Someone else will monopolize their force upon us, right? Because if we allow ourselves to crumble and our sovereignty to die with it, right, then other nations will come in, monopolize force, and put us under their control. And in this modern world, economically is the easiest way to do that. If we do not absolve ourselves of this debt, right? If we do not get this debt under control, then our sovereignty is absolutely at stake. Right? We're talking about nearly $40 trillion. It's an unfathomable amount of money, right? That this nation is responsible for, that us living citizens are responsible, right? And whether we want to accept that responsibility or not, the rest of the world will hold us accountable to it because the rest of the world sees us responsible for it, right? And so I can claim all I want. That's not my debt. That's not my debt. That's not my debt. But the collector is going to come knocking on my door. And it's going to be China or Russia or whatever forces that is, okay, are going to come knocking on my door if I avoid this debt and treat it like it's not mine. So
Can
when
I
we
answer
talk
that?
about,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, because that sounds like to me that this is the analogy. I like to break things down simply because I'm not very smart. So that's like
I don't agree with that, Tim, but okay.
no. I mean I'm not a big word guy, and I'm not accusing you of that either, because that annoys me that people use these big words, mainly because I'm just not smart. I don't know them. But so I'm just breaking it down simply. Like that's like a thief stealing from me, but then he racks up even more debt than what he stole from me. But now I'm expected to pay the difference.
Mhm.
That don't make any sense.
I understand why
To
that
me,
analogy
if China
holds for
comes over
you.
here and wants to collect on the debt, I'm going to show him the thief. That's the guy.
Mhm.
Get it from his ass. That's who you want, not me. Like go to DC, level the place, leave me alone.
Right, but do you genuinely believe they'll leave you alone? Do you
I don't
have
know.
any sort of faith in their motivations that they'll leave you alone?
As being a foreign nation, if they're way over in China, I think I have a better chance of probably living under a Chinese king or a Chinese governor than I
Sure.
would of U.S. president. Yeah, I do. I
Oh,
take my
oh,
chances here.
oh, okay. But so you are admitting that they won't leave you alone, that they will put you under their rule. You just think that you might favor it.
Possibly.
Okay. All
I
right.
just don't.
I'm for
I can't. But I can't agree with the argument of that. I'm the one responsible for the debt because when it was stolen from my grandfather and his grandmother and in me for all the years that I've been here, I can't see how I'm responsible for a debt when they had stolen money to work with and then they went in the hole on top of that stolen money. They blew through the stolen money, then they went in debt and in more debt and in more debt, and somehow I'm on the hook for it. That blows my
Well,
mind.
that goes into the whole argument of like reparations. While the argument is sound, yes, it was horrible what we did to your ancestors. I will absolutely acknowledge that. It's like at a certain point, though, is like, but am I really responsible for paying for your
yes,
situation today?
yes,
Why is
yes,
that?
yes. Because I am connected to the history of the membership of the state that I participate in. I am connected to the history. The history is my history. It is mine. I cannot claim I cannot claim to be an American without accepting the history of America
Hey,
as my own.
Absolutely, but I think this is kind of where we, again,
can I
Hispanic
denounce
wise,
my
I can.
citizenship right here? Get out of this.
This is where I would make
I,
the argument, and considering you have a Hispanic background, I would say the Aztecs, you
yeah.
still owe them money, but most of them are pretty much dead by this point. So somehow you got absolved because they're dead, but the white people still got to pay for this. I absolutely agree with you, by the way. I don't want people to think I'm not arguing this
Well,
because, as
I'm
I
an
just said,
American. I'm an American. If
right.
reparations were paid out, part of my taxes would go to that, whether I'm white or not. And I believe that they should be paid out. Right? Because I am connected to the history of America. I do not live in the same America that built that history. Right? That's not the America I'm living in now. I am accepting the inheritance I have as a citizen
Uh,
and rectifying it as best as I can, right? So that future generations don't have to take the burden of rectifying past history, right?
Wouldn't it be
And
better? Wouldn't it be better for all the people that felt like you and both of you and start a GoFundMe account and then fund it and then give to people voluntarily, give to whatever community you
well,
think
especially
they.
if you can even afford it, because like if they're just taking the tax right off the top, because oh, your great grandfather did this, such and so, is like I
Well, and you're
understand that, but
saying,
like we're talking about, I can't afford health care, but you want me to pay for somebody's dead grandfather that died 200 years ago. I'm sorry, but like, good grief, I'm going to die today.
Yeah.
That doesn't exactly function. Whereas if you're giving of your own charitable of accord, you're acknowledging there was a problem made. And as an individual today, I say I reject, I renounce, and I'm going to make it better from here on out. And if I can, and if I'm able, I will try to make monetary amends for such things. But I think to just put that as like a lump sum, that's just automatically upon you. It's like, okay, so I'm born, but before I was even literally conceived, you're telling me before mom and dad got together, there's $140,000 or
And
100,
that's a good
whatever.
point. Well, about the only thing that this whole Americanism and patriotism and God bless America and I'm American, about the only thing it's given anybody is when you're born, you're in debt.
Yeah,
I'm proud to be an American. I'm in debt the day I'm born.
land of the
yeah,
free, home of the
I, I,
slaves.
I mean, a lot of nations are in debt, right? We're all indebted to each other. The irony is that story of the people who all owe each other $20, right? So like the bread
Uh,
maker
uh,
owes the butter maker $20, and the butter maker owes the cow owner $20, and the cow owner owes the bread maker $20, and some guy comes in and gives the bread maker $20, and he pays off the butter maker, and the butter maker pays off the cow owner, and the cow owner pays off the bread owner, and then the guy takes his $20 back, and everyone's paid off, but no money was actually introduced anymore, right?
money is an
There's
illusion.
sort of an irony to this whole debt system, right? Like all these nations are in debt to other nations who are in debt to each other. We could wipe a lot of the debt off. That would take
Jubilee.
global. That would take global consideration, right? And so if we wanted to do that, we would really have to advocate for global regulation to step in and say, hey, how much of this debt are we all just globally sharing that we could just wipe off of each other, right? But
We could
until
just
that point,
we could
I
just
actually
bond.
I
think
am
they will
for the
do that,
protection of the
Manny.
sovereignty of. Yeah, well, up until that point, I am into the protection of the sovereignty of the United States, and I will continue to try and protect the sovereignty of the United States and every citizen here, um, as long as I can and with as much influence as I can. And part of that is me taking ownership of the history of what I've inherited. Um, there's a great Stoic saying, I believe it was Crito talking to Socrates when he was sentenced to death. Um, and Crito tells Socrates that that they have a ship ready for him. They've already paid off the guards. They're going to get him out of here. He doesn't have to die. And Socrates says, no, no. Um, it's my duty to my nation to die. They've sentenced me to death, a group of my peers. I owe this responsibility to them. I've lived my whole life here. I've gained all of the benefits from here. I've participated in this, and now they demand my death. That's the price I now owe. Um, and Crito just can't conceive of this thought at all. It's just like, what are you even talking about? You're insane. You're going to leave your children behind, so on and so forth, right? And finally, Socrates asks him this question: did this life promise you a father? Did this life promise you a good father, or did this life promise you a father? Right? You're granted a father. You might not necessarily be a good one, right? This life isn't fair. Whoever told us that lied. Okay, by design, it's not fair, and I'm talking about by like wholly design. It's not fair. It's not the systems. Okay, a lot of the systems we build aren't fair, but the world itself is not fair. You're born into whatever it is you're born into. It didn't promise you a good life. It just promised you a life when you were born, right? And so it didn't promise me that I was going to be born into a nation without debt, right? I was just born into a nation with debt. That my inheritance in this life. As long as I'm a citizen, it's my debt.
I do
That's my
find
view
this
on that.
interesting. Uh, I wanted to say this earlier, but I didn't get the chance. Y'all were talking about inheritance, and we were talking about private property a little bit, and we didn't get into it. But like as far as the difference between an AnCap and a mutualist would be this whole idea of inherited property, me passing down something to my grandkids. So you're okay totally with the government passing down all this inheritance to me, but it would be wrong for me to and pass down actual bought and paid for property to my uh, grandkids or children. That's kind of a weird. I don't know. It just stuck out to me. The
I,
government, we have all this that we have that have this inheritance that comes upon us. We're born into this world in debt, because of this state system and collectivism. But yet, personally, you would be against me in handing down inherited property to, as far as in a private property sense. It just kind of mind
Hmm.
boggling.
Yeah, I'm not saying that with the knowledge that our nation's collective has today, that I have access to, that I would have designed the same system we have today. In fact, with the knowledge of our collective um, engagement now over nearly 300 years, right? I can look back and say, hey, if we go with this Federal Reserve thing, that's going to be a bad thing, right? But to a lot of people, it was a good idea for a long time. And we definitely benefited as a nation from it for a very long time.
Mhm.
And we failed. Like at some point, we overindulged. For a time, it met our need, and then we stayed in the pursuit of that need for so long it became indulgence, right? And now it's our detriment, right? And when I talked about that concept earlier, right? If my pursuits are always the same forever, eventually whatever I'm pursuing will become my detriment. Right? And so at some point this made sense, and at some point this saved us, and at some point this helped us, and it has definitely helped us. It's now our detriment, right? And now I have to assume that, right? Does that mean I want to keep this same system going? No. Let's put a stop to it. First off, get rid of this fucking Federal Reserve. Hey, let's stop digging. Okay? We now know this is no longer good, right? But we have to absolve this now. We have this thing we have to absolve. And I wish that 40 generations ago, people were saying that, right? And I wish they said, let's take the burden, right? Before it gets to $112,000 per citizen, right? I wish past
Well, 40
collective
years ago,
energy.
40 years ago, Murray Rothbard was saying those things.
Well, I wish we had influenced our nation to do that, right? And talking about the idea that the reality that we live in is that there's only two ways that this sort of changes, right? It either collapses from the inside or collapses from the outside from external pressure, right?
Right.
Well, if we're living our lives through that reality, through that belief system, through this acceptance that this is happening, right? Then any faith or hope to change this, to maintain this, to grow this, to adapt this, it's gone, right? And so I am powerless, right? I've accepted that I'm powerless. I'm not even trying to influence the change anymore. I'm accepting it will die,
Yeah.
right? And I just argue from that framework, like, what is the benefit to us? What is the
I think
benefit to Americans?
the benefit for me personally is if you can bring people to that realization that there is no saving this. This
Sure.
is a ritualistic pedophile uh death cult
Hmm.
that sits in DC, controlled by Israel for the most part, the Mossad, and our CIA. And there is no saving this. If you can get people to realize that, then they start to live outside of the system. And I think that is our greatest hope, is for people to not embrace the system and say, if we just get enough people screaming loud enough, we can do something. It's saying, I'm tired of this crap. I'm going to pull back from it, and I'm going to engage in small collectives, small societies, families. And I'm just, that's personally where I'm at. I don't see any hope in the federal government. The hope is in individual people pulling out of this sick, evil system.
I think
Shackles of
individual
statism.
people have the ability to compound their influence and compound their power if they start locally, right? If you are active locally, then your voice is louder the further you get, right? If you have a real stronghold in your local community, then you have a stronger hold in your state. If you have a
But
stronger hold in your state, then you have a stronger hold in your federal government, right? And
but
so
but but,
if
but
people
taking a
want more
stance,
influence,
but taking a
then they
stance
need
in a
to
government,
compound it.
Yeah, but taking a stance in a government system means I'm now inserting myself as an authority figure over other people, and I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to set myself up as some authority over someone else.
But why would you think that that's the only option to engage, right? If the system was originally enacted to be a representative system,
It
right?
wasn't.
Why can't we now have what? Okay, well,
It wasn't. It's a joke. It was
I'll
never.
agree.
It,
I'll
it, it was
agree that
enacted for certain landowners to have influence, and that was it.
I agree. I agree that that is legitimately how it was used and is used and can be used. I will say that the ability to represent is real. People just don't want to do it. They
Yeah.
like being leaders. They like being leaders. But why is it not possible, right, that a new generation of politicians could come to say, hey, we need to actually just represent people,
But still,
right?
you're
Like,
talking
I'm
about.
going to get into politics to be a representative.
But even if you're, I'd say, you have a elected official that is a true representative, and they represent the will of the majority, you're still just surrendering to this democracy. You're surrendering to two wolves and a lamb deciding what they want to eat for lunch. How is that?
until how small until how small is it uh good enough, right? Like, so if I'm a city council member, and in my city, for example, there's 10,000 people, and we have 5 city council members, so each one of them roughly representing the interests of 2,000 people, right? I'm not always going to act in the benefit of all 2,000. That's impossible, right? So there will be some majority that I'm representing, right? And
Why
that's
do you need
how
to
that
act in
district
that?
is going to
Why do you need
shift.
to act in the benefit of anybody? Why can't you just leave people alone and let them act in the benefit of their own selves? That's the point I'm trying to make.
If I may
Because
interject, if I may
only the
interject,
able can. Because only the able can.
What does
Only
that
the
mean?
able can. Only the able can act in their best interest. Those who are not able will get abused, will get exploited, will have everything taken from them. Those who are not able, right, will be left behind and used by those who are. That's why.
So
That's
people
why we
people
can't
aren't
just leave them to
people
themselves.
aren't used and abused in the system that we have, the representative government that we have. I mean,
I'm
how has
not
this
saying
representative government helped people not be abused?
I'm not saying that there is in fact, I will never claim that there is a possible world in which humans exist that exploitation, abuse, and harm won't be a part of the equation. In
But
fact, I think
you
I
compound it
truly,
by
honestly believe.
consolidating the power. I'm saying
I think it's minimized. I think it's
okay.
no,
minimized.
no.
I think it's greatly minimized.
I'm saying when you just have one person that's a thief, speaking for one person, only so many people can get robbed. But when you have a thief that now represents thousands, then god dang, you can steal from everybody.
Mm. If I may, what Manny seems to be leaning in, and I'll let him pick the definition just based off of what he was describing. A system where the most intelligent, capable keyword I typed in, and talented individuals rule is called a geniocracy, ruled by geniuses, or a meritocracy, a rule based on the ability and the achievement capabilities. It emphasizes leadership by the smartest and most skilled rather than by the wealth, class, or birthright. A genocracy, a government system proposed to be controlled specifically by very smart people or geniuses. Meritocracy, a society where power and goods are distributed based on individual talent, ability, and performance, often measured by exams. And then other two options are intellectocracy, intellectocracy, a concept where leaders are elected based on knowledge, experience, and understanding, and aristocracy, classic view, which was originally pitched by Plato and Aristotle, which viewed this as the rule by the most intellectually and morally superior class. Now, if I may just interject before I throw it back to Manny to give a response of which one he thinks he falls more into. This was where Socrates, as we've already referenced before, he was basically starting to ask the question, why? And obviously, if the people who rule our society are in charge, they must know the reasons for the meaning of life. So he went to go ask them, and they didn't know. So he says, all right, fine. I will go to the builders, the architects. They built this great city that we live in. Obviously, they must have some sort of foundational knowledge of how and what makes life have meaning. They didn't know. So he finally goes to the poets and the artists, because obviously they're the ones that are reflecting upon our culture, our words, and what makes us a society. And they did not have an answer for him. And this is why the Socratic method comes into play and why I highly always emphasize it. Because he finally said, you know what? If these people don't have the answer, why are we giving them charge over the populace? And this is why he was charged with corrupting the youth of Rome, because you're getting them to start to ask questions. Why are you submitting to his authority? Why do you think hierarchy is important? And that was, again, why I drink hemlock, is because I'm always asking the question, why? So, Manny, with that being said, I think Tim kind of leans into this the Socratic area here, where he's starting to say, I understand what you're saying, but if we surrender all of these powers and abilities, as it were, to people that are more intellectual superior to us, whether we, you speak better than me, you have a more wealthy family, however you define success. Whereas the other one is saying, I really just want to take care of me and mine and where I'm at. I really don't care about all that stuff. What's wrong with that per se? If you could give an answer for that.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. How is that?
It's not possible. Engagement isn't a choice. Engagement is a requirement of living.
Yeah, but voluntary engagement. I can choose who I want. Nobody's saying I don't want to be engaged with anybody. I just want to choose who I would be engaged with.
Kind of like a forced marriage.
Yeah.
I don't. I what if I want to marry for love? Well, you need to do this because it's for the benefit of the family. But I don't love them. It's arranged. You have to accept it because this is just the way it is.
The question was posed under the notion of who should rule,
Right.
and my answer to that would be no one. No one should rule.
Anarchy.
People should represent. People should represent.
Themselves, or somebody should always be the shadow of who they're representing.
If I were elected as a representative,
Yeah.
okay, it is my duty to vote in the interest of the collective that I'm representing, even if I think they're wrong, even if I disagree wholeheartedly, even if I'm like, this is the worst mistake we'll ever make. It is their mistake to make. It is not my mistake to decide. Right? It is their mistake to make. Now, as a dutiful representative, that wouldn't be the only duty I assume. The duty to inform would be another duty I assume. Hey, here's what we're polling out of our area. I don't think this is a good idea. Here's why I don't think this is a good idea. There's all these other factors that we really need to take into consideration. Let's do some more polling. If it still comes back and I still disagree, oh well. I still have to vote with the thing I disagree because I'm not ruling them.
But democracy is ruling them. The majority is ruling the minority.
Yeah.
In what universe can we conceive with humans where there will never be a power exchange? Right? Any engagement is a power exchange.
So
any engagement.
You don't necessarily say that power is evil.
No.
You just say as long as the majority are wielding it, then it's somehow legit.
No, again, direct democracy I don't believe is the best form of democracy. Right? Direct democracy is just a simple majority.
Democracy. Right? It's still the same outcome of whether a representative, whether people vote straight democracy on a certain topic, or whether they elect a representative and then the representative does like you say, which they never do. But let's say they did.
Which they don't. I agree.
Don't. I wholeheartedly agree. Yes. But let's say they did. How would that still not be ruling by the majority? Whether it's representative or whether it's strict democracy. The outcome's the same. The majority still wins.
What is the intent here, right? Like, what is the end goal? Because in my worldview, the end goal isn't to appease everyone's desires and and uh, and wants. It's impossible, right? The end goal is the most amount of good for the most amount of people, the most amount of time. That's the end
And,
goal,
and I
right?
argue the way you achieve that is let people live their own lives and decide what is best for each person, each individual person.
And I just don't understand how under some variant of our current system, and in fact, how even under our current system, most of your decisions are entirely yours, right? Like
Well, that's my problem
there's
with the current
all
system.
most of your decisions are entirely yours under the current system, right? It, how you choose to engage is also entirely yours, right? Like because you do have some freedom in the form of engagement, right? I I don't believe that having regulatory agencies and systems that work on our behalf or on the behalf of some, right, remove all freedoms, all rights, all liberties, all decisions from the average person, right?
Nobody's saying it
So,
removes them all, but even if removing some,
well, it again, this is where I
in,
get back
in
to all
inches.
engagement is a relinquishing of some of your freedom. All engagement is a relinquishing of some of your freedom. If you chose to be
Engagement.
entirely free,
You're talking about all statism. Maybe would engagement in statism. Maybe I have to relinquish some of my rights, but not just engagement. Just engagement with the average person. I don't have to give up my rights to engage with another human being. To even engage with a collective of human beings, I don't have to give up my rights.
If I may, Manny, it's actually brilliant. While I don't concur with your final aspect with like the representative, I'm writing something called the Consigliere Ronin, person playing the role of playing devil's advocate. It doesn't necessarily mean I am aligned with this group or this faction or whatever. I am just going to present to you a Socratic representation saying, listen, I talked to the other side. These are their grievances. These are the problems. This is probably what's going to happen if you push in this area or you try to, make it worse here. I'm advising you. I'm really telling you with, the art of diplomacy is exploiting hard truths with tact. But if you do this, I absolve it. I am not responsible for what you do. And again, I think this is where I would veer. I would prefer to walk away as opposed to cast my vote because then I am saying I actually agree with the majority. Whereas the sovereign says, you know what? I have the ability to walk away right now because I disagree with them. And I was trying to do the best I could as another sovereign individual to ask themselves the question as the individual. If you do this, you're going to hurt somebody else. If you don't consider this aspect, you're going to be doing this because the
yeah,
very
I just don't believe that there is a possible experience that does not cause harm. I do not believe that there is a possible experience as humans that don't
right.
cause harm to each other. In fact, when I talk to someone about the concept of trust, the concepts of love, right? When I say I love you, what I'm saying to you is I trust you to hurt me because I know that when you do, because it's inevitable that you will, that you'll be there to help make it right. That we're going to then walk together through that harm and at the other end be both better for it because I don't believe you're moving with malintent. And so I trust you. I love you. I trust you to harm me, right? Because I do believe that all exchange is at the detriment, is at the compromise of oneself. If I wanted to be truly free, I'd strip myself of my clothes and I'd run out into the woods with the deer. And I wouldn't engage with another single person. I would still have to compromise to the engagement of the souls of the deers and the animals that I would engage with out there. Okay. But it would be to a lesser extent than I do with other people. But every engagement I have with a person, I am making space for that person. I am taking consideration for that person. I am trying to understand, right, who this person is, where we're coming from, what do we share, right? And that comes out of chosen, right?
Yes.
Because I want to work in good faith. It comes out of chosen compromise of my own liberties in that moment, in that engagement, right? Especially if what I want to do is achieve some kind of understanding or some kind of shared value or work to some shared end, right? Then I must compromise. I must be humble, right? Like I must accept some humility that I might not know everything that I know. And we can extrapolate that from the very small ways that we do this with one another all the way to the very large scale. But to believe that I could create a system in which I would not harm the people around me, I just don't think is realistic. And that might be where we differ, and that might be where we conclude different things, right? Because
Actually,
I
if I
do believe I do believe that the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, the greatest amount of time means that a lot of people will be harmed in that pursuit. But all of those people would have been harmed individually in their individual pursuits, right?
That's not, you can't say that. That like you were making an assumption that somehow in the absence of the state that people would be harmed. But yet for your state to function 100%, people need to be harmed
But we
because you,
know
you
that without the absence of the ability for a small collective to reach out to a larger collective to help protect itself against other invading collectives, without that ability, people are harmed. We know that. We've seen it. We've lived it with the Wild Wild West. We've seen it. We've lived it. We know it.
yeah,
Right. And so the only
I
way
don't
to
think the
pull
Wild Wild West
in,
was as bad as movies like to make it out to be. I really don't.
well, I mean, we can see it in other nations, but I thought it was a fitting example, especially out here in rural country where I live, where I absolutely have a corrupt group of individuals, generational, that are controlling land and expansion out here.
Yeah, but how are they
Um,
doing that with the force of the state, or are they doing it privately? I'm sure they're using the
both,
force of the state.
both.
yeah,
They're
usually it's
doing both.
privatization through the state. I think though, in a way, Tim, he did many. You kind of do describe exactly what Christ is all about, and I know, Tim, you have a song, "No King but Christ." That is
Yeah.
literally the anarchist slogan for Christians, these anarchist Christians. And you're right. Christ literally was on the cross saying, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? In order to make this contract, this relationship possible, he had to suffer. So, in a spiritual sense, you kind of just encapsulated exactly what we stand for. However, I think this is where it does lean into what history was saying is like these Christians, Rome is falling because of you. You won't join Caesar's legions. And the response that somebody gave him is saying, if more people became Christians, you wouldn't need legions and you wouldn't need war. Now, granted, we might disagree and argue all the stuff with crusades and this thing and that thing, but a real Christian, you should know them by their fruits, your character, your conduct, right? As MLK was even talking about, I want a man not to be judged by the color of his skin, but the conduct of his character. Now, say what you will about MLK, but I think that's kind of in essence what we're trying to convey here is that as an individual, my actions, yes, and as you just said, it's a matter of love and trust, and hence the aspect of cooperation. If I love you, I'm willing to make said compromises because I want this to work. I want this world to become better. Now, granted, we're going to get a-holes, but in the mutualist aspect, when they started a community, well, how did they handle it? You're not getting any bread and water from here. It's like turning down ice. You're not coming into this restaurant. You are not going to get any food. Well, if you're not going to accept me in the community, what's the point of being here? Nobody talks to you. Like, what's the point? And you leave. And do we have to use force and hurt in order to do that? Maybe emotionally, but physically, we didn't lift a finger. Now, again, we're talking ideals, we're talking utopias, but let's veer into the last part because I don't want to keep you guys for more than what we're already going on. But this is the last part. We'll sum it up and then we'll have closing remarks and statements. So, a question from Rothbard Parenti and Proud Home. What causes domination? State coercion, class ownership, economic hierarchy. Solution, pure capitalism, or democratic socialism. Now, just let me pause here before everybody gets freaked out and thinks solely the Bernie Sanders democratic socialism. No, I'm saying that solely for listeners, not something many. um, I know George Orwell, he said everything that I wrote after 1936 was on behalf of democratic socialism. Jack London, a very prominent author that wrote White Fang, he was for the idea of democratic socialism, where I will say for Orwell as well, as he was coming to the end of his life, he said, if I could change anything, I probably, for my part, would have joined the anarchists. So I think that being said, in its earlier format, the concept was democracy, or as mutualism, we are going to work together in order to achieve a common goal as a society, I think is what democratic socialism originally its intent meant. I'll just give clarity for people. Cooperative exchange, which is specifically mutualism. Freedom means no coercion, no exploitation, no dependency. Biggest fear is government power, corporate power, or structural authority itself. In summary, Rothbard removed the state, move towards capitalism, and it becomes morality. Parenti, regulate and replace capitalism with democracy. And Proudhon, change property relations and hierarchy dissolves organically. Gentlemen, closing thoughts. I'll let the first person to raise their hand answer. Wow, I now leave it up to the individual and nobody else.
Yeah,
So
sure.
like all the
I'll
way too.
answer.
Go for it, Manny.
All right, Manny, go for it.
Um, yeah, I think this goes back to the conversation about how to affect change.
Mm,
I think an acknowledgement that change is inevitable um, is important in acceptance, right? You know, what we foresee for ourselves through our chosen actions, we know is different than what we have today, right? We know change is coming, and we want to work towards the change that we want.
right.
Um, and I think um, if you change the systems that are in play, right, like the hierarchy dissolves, right? But only if that's the intention of changing the systems, right? If you change the systems to strengthen hierarchies, then hierarchy strengthen,
Mm,
right? I think I'm there right now. Maybe I just have to think a little more.
fair enough. Tim.
Well, I want to affect not change, but I want to affect freedom. I want people to be free. I want people to make their own decisions. I don't want collective decision making. I want individuals to be individuals. I want spontaneous order. Um, I want true regulation, and that's regulation in a free market that is not under the threat of a gun, but it's based off of mutual exchange, voluntary exchange. Me selling something to someone, getting something in exchange, my reputation's on the line, my products on the line. That's what regulates better than anything else. Uh, and I just don't think of when you if it'll work on a small basis, which I think everybody agrees that what I'm saying works in a like a I don't know, 1,000 member town, this little small town, you know, they'll say, well, yeah, it would work there, but you can't compound it. Well, if government would upset the small community, then how would it benefit on a large scale? To me, if it won't quantify on a small scale, if it limits freedom on a small scale, then it's only going to make things worse on a larger scale. And Manny's arguments, I think, are sound and legit about corporations and national companies, and like you almost think, well, somebody's got to regulate these people. But if we had a true free market, uh, consumers would regulate these people, and I don't even think they would be that many big national companies. I think everything would be consolidated down more to a local, a state level. I think we would have a closer to the Articles of Confederation type 50 state solution where we would have these experiments going on in different states. Some states could experiment with socialism. Some states could experiment with what the ideas that I'm espousing, voluntary exchange, and then we could see, hey, which one works better. But instead, we get this one size fits all federal government approach, and I don't think it works for anybody.
Yeah, regulated by the state and either capitalism and or communism, I think kind of really robs the individual. And I think ultimately at the end, this is where we all do 100% align with to a fair amount. I think in summary, I'm not sure so much of many would agree with this, but we anarchists do not want to emancipate the people. We want the people to emancipate themselves. Enrico Malatesta. I think that's kind of where we do find a semi-alignment, is we're saying, you know what? While Manny is saying ideally, I think it would be great if we had nice individuals to represent us that had integrity for once. I think we all do concur at the end of the day that more people should stand up and advocate and speak up for themselves and start thinking for themselves and start learning how to love your neighbor as yourself. Any closing remarks from Manny?
Um, Markets, I believe in them. I just believe under socialized democratic ownership and rule, for lack of a better word right now. The idea being that markets would be free to dictate, would be free, and so prices would be dictated by supply, by demand, things that naturally occur in the market, that they wouldn't be um, artificially inflated or deflated due to outside control, but that the production and the goods and services available in that market would belong to the people collectively, and they would choose what was produced and how those resources were used. I think is the natural progression if we are to survive as a nation. I think it's the only way to protect ourselves long term is to um, work to absolve ourselves um, from this debt and to work more collectively in how we use our resources. I think that's the thing that grants us the most amount of freedom because it grants us the most amount of mobility.
All right. Tim?
Yeah, just thank you. This was been fun.
Yeah,
Nice
I
meet.
really, this
Yeah,
was
It's been
better
great.
than I was anticipating. I genuinely
nice
am
meeting
grateful.
you, Manny. And it's been refreshing. I get a little animated. I get a little hot sometimes. I don't mean anything by it. I'm just passionate. Um, I,
Same.
pre-
I
I
appreciate your passion, Tim.
well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you.
I
You love.
genuinely think if we lived close to each other, we'd be hanging out.
I think we would too. I really do. I
Yeah,
think we have a lot in common personally. And so yeah,
I think so.
nice to meet you. I'm just, I'm going to quote, not necessarily quote, but paraphrase Christ, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We tell our kids, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. But then they grow up and they learn about civics and that they find out, well, you can do that as long as you're elected to do so. And then you can hurt people and you can take their stuff if the majority tells you you can. And I think it might sound childish. It might sound, like a nursery rhyme, but I think if we as a society came back to basic principles of don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, I think we'd be better off.
Amen. Well said. All right, folks. Without any further ado, this is the Mana Daily Podcast. Find me on Spotify, Rumble, YouTube. If you can and if you're able, Patreon for support. As well, I'm going to let Tim give a shout out. Manny, I'm not sure if you've got any links or somebody can throw your way for support. I know you're kind of in a little bit of a tight situation as always, but you always seem to plug through. However, folks, you guys sending in us money gives us time to set aside so that we can have these conversations and prompt these thoughts, and so that you can in turn talk to these certain points and where you agree, where you disagree with your own little communities and pockets where you're at. So, Tim, if you've got anything, Manny, I don't know if you have to scramble to find something, but
You want me to go first?
yeah, go ahead, plug in something, and then
Yeah.
let Manny go.
AnCapTim.com. That has all of my socials. I do a couple like 2-minute shorts weekly. I do a Spooner Sunday that I just did today. There's a Lysander Spooner quotes. I do Free Market Fridays. I do Wheels of War Wednesdays. And I've got a Christian one called Two Kingdoms Tuesday, kind of contrasting the Christian nationalist, the Christian socialist with the true Christian, according to me, or according to Jesus, I think. So you can check those things out. I also do music. I'm a singer songwriter, anti-state singer songwriter for the most part, and my album's on at AnCapTim.com. It's on Spotify. It's on all the streaming, all that stuff. So yeah, check me out on socials and Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff.
Perfect. Manny?
Well, Tim, I will check you out. That was
Thank you.
awesome. Hey, I don't have a whole lot other than if you're in Southern Colorado and you want to come hang out. We've got the T Spot down here, slvtspot.com. I'm sorry, slvtspot.org is where you can find us. We are a nonprofit organization and support Brandon so we can keep doing more of this.
I really appreciate that, Manny. Serious folks, you'd be surprised. $3, $4, $5. I think $3 a month is like $60 the entire year, cheaper than Netflix. You really can't get a better deal than that. Everybody, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights and counterpoints. I really appreciate it. This was a joy to moderate. Until next time, folks, we will catch you all on the next one.